My name is Ezekiel Zeke Thorne, a water treatment engineer who survived the first 5 days of the zombie outbreak. When Patient Zero turned at Mercy General, I was testing chlorine levels at Northridge Water Treatment Plant. As civilization collapsed around me, I had to use my expertise to stay alive, protect a traumatized child, and find a way to reach my daughter across the country. What I'm about to tell you might save your life if the infection ever reaches your area. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. My name is Ezekiel Thorne. Most people call me Zeke. Until 5 days ago, I was a water treatment plant engineer and supervisor at Northridge Water Treatment Facility. It was a job most people never thought about. Water comes out of the tap clean, safe, and ready to use. Nobody wonders how it gets that way. Nobody cares about the complex filtration systems, the chemical treatments, or the infrastructure that makes it possible. Nobody thinks about the people who make sure it happens every single day. That was before the infected started walking, before the military quarantines failed, before the broadcasts stopped, before clean water became the most valuable resource on the planet. I'm recording this for anyone who might find it useful. Knowledge is survival now, and what I know might keep you alive. If you're listening to this, you've already made it longer than most. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I arrived at the plant at 6:30, badged in through security, and went straight to the control room to check the overnight logs. Northridge serves about 350,000 people across 3 counties. We process roughly 30 million gallons of water daily through a series of mechanical and chemical treatments. My first task every morning was always water sample testing. I remember noticing we had several call-outs that morning. Johnson from filtration, Patel from chemical treatment, Rodriguez from distribution, all called in sick. It wasn't unusual during flu season, but it was more than normal. I made a note to reschedule the maintenance on Pump Station 8. That would be the least of my worries before the day ended. The first news report came around 9 in the morning. Local station mentioned a medical emergency at Mercy General Hospital. Something about an aggressive patient attacking staff. I didn't pay much attention. Hospitals deal with violent patients sometimes. It happens. By 11, though, the regular programming was interrupted by an emergency broadcast. The anchor looked tense, reading directly from a prepared statement. The CDC has identified several cases of acute necrotizing encephalitis in the metropolitan area. Symptoms include high fever, aggression, disorientation, and in severe cases, violent behavior. Citizens are advised to avoid contact with symptomatic individuals and report any cases to emergency services immediately. I remember watching the pressure gauges for District 7 where the hospital was located. The water demand had spiked dramatically. That was the first sign something was seriously wrong. Hospitals don't suddenly need triple their normal water supply unless they're dealing with mass casualties. Around noon, Marcus Weber, the plant supervisor, called an emergency meeting. By then, the news was reporting multiple incidents across the city. The term infected was being used, though no one was saying the Z word yet. Weber looked shaken as he addressed the 12 of us who were on shift. "Listen up, people," he said. "The situation in the city is deteriorating. I've received orders from the Municipal Emergency Management Office to maintain water service at all costs, but they're allowing non-essential personnel to check on their families and secure their homes." There was immediate tension in the room. Everyone had loved ones they were worried about. Weber continued, "We need a skeleton crew to stay. At least 5 people. Any volunteers?" I raised my hand. My apartment downtown was in a high-rise with good security. My ex-wife and daughter, Sam, lived across the country. I had tried calling them earlier but couldn't get through. Networks were already overloaded with everyone trying to reach family. I figured I'd have better luck using the plant's landlines. The chemical storage room is fully stocked, I told Weber as people started filing out. We should move some supplies to the control room just in case. I didn't know then how important that suggestion would become. By early afternoon, the calls started coming in from employees who had left. What they described didn't match the sanitized version on the news. Martinez, from maintenance, called from his car, voice shaking. "They're attacking people in the streets, Zeke. I saw a woman get pulled from her car at the intersection of Maple and 4th. The guy, he was biting her. There was blood everywhere." I kept trying to reach Sam between monitoring the systems. Every call failed to connect. The last news broadcast I saw before the networks went dark showed FEMA officials and military personnel establishing quarantine zones. They were still calling it an outbreak of highly aggressive infections leading to severe neurological symptoms. They still thought they could contain it. Around 6 in the evening, I was checking the security feed when I saw the first infected person at our perimeter fence. I almost didn't recognize what I was seeing. A man in a torn business suit walking with an uneven gait. His movements were wrong, jerky, and uncoordinated. His skin had a grayish cast, and dark fluid stained his shirt front. He bumped into the fence repeatedly like he couldn't process the obstacle in front of him. When he turned toward the camera, I saw his face. His eyes were clouded, milky. A chunk of his cheek was missing, showing teeth and gum line. I'd never seen anything like it. Weber saw it too. He turned to me, face pale. "I need to get to my family." I didn't try to stop him. In his position, I would have done the same thing. Before he left, he walked me through the lockdown protocols. The facility had been designed with multiple security layers: badge access doors, reinforced fences, emergency shutters on all ground-level windows. "The generators have enough fuel for about a week," he said. "After that, we'll need to manually operate the essential systems." He paused at the door. "Good luck, Thorne. If anyone can keep this place running, it's you." Those were the last words I heard from Marcus Weber. After he left, I began moving essential supplies to the control room: water purification tablets, first aid kits, non-perishable food from the break room. I also gathered specific chemicals from the treatment storage: chlorine dioxide precursors, iodine solutions, calcium hypochlorite. Most people wouldn't recognize their value, but I knew these chemicals could purify water in an emergency or be repurposed for other uses if needed. As night fell, I made final rounds of the facility. The security feeds showed more infected gathering at the fence: 6, then 12, then 20. They seemed drawn to the sound of the generators, or maybe the lights. I activated the emergency shutters and locked down all external access points. The plant became a fortress. I tried the radio, scanning frequencies for information. Most channels were static, but I caught fragments of emergency broadcasts. The infection was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. The transmission vector appeared to be bodily fluids, primarily through bites. The incubation period varied wildly, sometimes hours, sometimes minutes. The pattern was consistent: infection, fever, death, reanimation. What nobody was saying, but what was becoming clear: once turned, these weren't people anymore. Their higher brain functions had shut down, leaving only the most primitive drives: movement and consumption. They were walking corpses, zombies, the word everyone had been avoiding. The first night was the longest of my life. I slept in short bursts, constantly checking the security feeds and monitoring the water systems. The pressure irregularities in the hospital sector had spread to neighboring districts. I manually adjusted our output to compensate, knowing that clean water would be critical for survivors. I found myself thinking about all the disaster preparedness drills we'd run over the years. We had planned for earthquakes, floods, tornadoes, even terrorist attacks. But no one had ever suggested preparing for the dead to rise and walk. Yet here I was, applying the same principles: secure resources, maintain critical systems, establish communication if possible, plan for long-term sustainability. By morning, the world outside the plant had fundamentally changed. Through the security cameras, I could see smoke rising from multiple locations in the city. Occasional gunfire echoed in the distance. The infected at our fence had grown to nearly 30. They stood there, swaying slightly, occasionally bumping against the chain link with no apparent purpose. Until something caught their attention, they would just wait. I inventoried my supplies and assessed the plant's security. The fence was sturdy but not impenetrable. The main buildings were reinforced concrete with limited access points. The control room could be sealed completely if necessary. I had enough food for perhaps 2 weeks if I rationed carefully. The water obviously wasn't a concern as long as the treatment systems functioned. The chemicals were my most valuable resource beyond the water itself. With the right combinations, I could create powerful disinfectants, improvised deterrents, or even weapons if it came to that. My years of working with water treatment had given me intimate knowledge of chemical reactions that most people would never consider. In my hands, ordinary pool supplies could become something far more useful. As the sun rose fully on that second day, I heard vehicles approaching. Through the cameras, I saw 3 of our staff returning: Miguel from maintenance, Lisa from quality control, and 2 others from the overnight crew who had left briefly to check their homes. Their faces told me everything I needed to know before they even entered the building. The world outside had gone to hell. I buzzed them in through the security gate, watching carefully to ensure no infected followed. As they drove through, I noticed the back of Miguel's truck was loaded with supplies: food, medicine, blankets. They had already shifted into survival mode. When they reached the main entrance, I let them in and immediately locked down behind them. Lisa hugged me, something she had never done in 3 years of working together. Miguel's normally jovial face was grim. "It's worse than they're saying on the news," he said. "Much worse." Miguel's hands were shaking as he set down a duffel bag filled with bottled water and canned food. "The National Guard is setting up blockades on major highways," he said. "They're trying to contain it, but people are panicking. I saw a family of 5 try to drive through a checkpoint. The soldiers opened fire when they wouldn't stop." Lisa was checking her phone, still desperately trying to get a signal. "My sister works at Mercy General," she said. "She called me yesterday morning, said they had a construction worker come in with a bite wound. They thought it was just a dog attack. By the time they realized something was wrong, half the emergency room staff was infected." The other 2 employees, Tanya from the lab and Kevin from maintenance, had their own stories. Kevin's neighborhood had been one of the first quarantined. He'd barely made it out before they sealed it off. Tanya had seen an infected person take down a police officer right in front of her apartment building. "What about the news?" I asked. "Are they giving any useful information?" "The last broadcast I saw was about 2 hours ago," Tanya said. "They're still calling it acute necrotizing encephalitis, but they finally admitted how it spreads. Bites transmit it directly. They said once infected, victims experience rapid onset fever, followed by organ failure, death, and then reanimation. The reanimated bodies retain basic motor functions and aggressive behavior patterns, specifically targeting non-infected humans." "They're finally saying the Z word?" I asked. "No." Kevin shook his head. "They're calling them reanimated infected individuals, but everyone knows what they are." We gathered in the control room and took stock of our situation. With 5 of us now, we could secure the facility more effectively and maintain critical operations. I'd already moved essential supplies there, and with what Miguel and the others brought, we were in good shape for at least a couple of weeks. I laid out what I thought we should prioritize: maintaining water treatment operations for as long as possible, securing the perimeter, conserving generator fuel, and establishing contact with emergency services if we could. Everyone agreed. The water system is more important than ever now, I explained. If municipal services collapse completely, clean water will become the most valuable resource. We need to keep the treatment processes running, even if we have to do it manually. We divided responsibilities. I would oversee water treatment and system operations. Miguel would handle maintenance and security. Lisa would monitor communications and try to establish contact with authorities. Kevin and Tanya would manage our supplies and take shifts watching the perimeter. As we organized, I noticed the first signs of power instability. The lights flickered briefly as the city grid experienced surges and drops. Our backup generators kicked in automatically when needed, but each time they did, we burned precious fuel. We tuned in to the emergency broadcast frequency. The information was becoming more fragmented as radio stations went off air. The military had established safe zones in several locations outside the city, but the routes there were increasingly dangerous. The infection was spreading exponentially. Most concerning was the announcement that water supplies in certain districts might be compromised. They didn't explain how or why, but it sent a chill through me. Around 2 in the afternoon, the power went out completely for 10 minutes before the generators stabilized. During that time, we stood in silence, listening to the distant sounds of chaos from the city, occasional gunfire, sirens, and something else, a low moaning that seemed to carry on the wind. When the power returned, we checked the security cameras. The number of infected at our fence had nearly doubled. They stood there, swaying slightly, occasionally pressing against the chain link. Their blank expressions and lifeless eyes made them seem like puppets with cut strings. "Why do they just stand there?" Tanya asked. "They're drawn to sound and movement," Kevin said. "The generators are probably attracting them. If something catches their attention, they'll become more active." As if to prove his point, a stray dog ran along the perimeter fence. Immediately, the infected lurched into motion, following the animal with surprising speed. The way they moved was unnatural, jerky and uncoordinated, yet relentless. The dog escaped easily, but the infected continued to move along the fence line for several minutes before settling back into their passive state. We decided to implement a buddy system for any movement around the facility. No one would go anywhere alone. It seemed unnecessary inside our secure building, but the precaution felt right given the circumstances. Around 4 in the afternoon, Kevin and Tanya volunteered to check the West Wing pumps. The pressure indicators were showing some irregularities, and we needed to ensure all systems were functioning properly. They took walkie-talkies and promised to report in every 15 minutes. The first check-in came on schedule. Everything was fine. The second check-in was 5 minutes late. When they finally called, Kevin's voice was tense. "We found a breach in the maintenance access door," he reported. "It's been forced open from the outside. We're securing it now." The third check-in never came. After 30 minutes of silence, Miguel and I decided to investigate. We armed ourselves with the only weapons available: a fire axe for Miguel and a heavy wrench for me. We also took flashlights, though the emergency lighting was still functioning. The West Wing was eerily quiet as we made our way through the corridors. The pump station was located in a separate building connected by a short covered walkway. As we approached the junction, I noticed a dark smear on the floor. Blood. "Kevin?" Miguel called out, keeping his voice low. "Tanya?" No response. We pushed through the double doors into the walkway. The maintenance access door at the far end was open, a chain cutter abandoned on the floor nearby. Someone had indeed forced their way in from outside, but it wasn't Kevin or Tanya who had done it. The infected man was kneeling over something on the floor of the pump room. He was wearing the tattered remains of hospital scrubs, his back to us as he hunched over his prey. The wet sounds of feeding filled the room. Miguel moved first, lifting the fire axe, but his foot hit an empty water bottle, sending it skittering across the floor. The infected man turned, his face smeared with blood and tissue. In that moment, I recognized him. Dr. Harris, who had given our team our annual physicals just months earlier. Now his eyes were milky white, his skin gray, a large bite wound visible on his neck. He lunged at us with surprising speed. Miguel swung the axe, connecting with the doctor's shoulder. It should have been a devastating blow, but the infected man barely seemed to notice. He grabbed Miguel's arm, pulling him forward with inhuman strength. I swung my wrench, connecting with the side of the infected doctor's head. There was a sickening crack, but still he continued his attack, now turning toward me. I struck again and again until finally he collapsed. Only then did we see what he had been feeding on. Kevin lay on the floor, his throat torn open, his eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Of Tanya, there was no sign. "We need to find her," Miguel said, his voice shaking. "She might still be alive." We searched the pump room and adjacent areas, calling Tanya's name as loudly as we dared. Eventually, we found a trail of blood leading to a supply closet. The door was locked from the inside. "Tanya," I called softly. "It's Zeke and Miguel. Are you hurt?" A weak voice answered. "Is it dead? The thing that attacked us?" "Yes," I assured her. "It's safe to come out now." The door opened slowly to reveal Tanya, pale and trembling, clutching her arm. Blood seeped between her fingers. "He bit me," she whispered. Kevin tried to fight him off, but there was nothing I could do. I ran. Tears streamed down her face. I ran and left him there. Miguel and I exchanged glances. We both knew what a bite meant. "Let's get you back to the control room," I said. "Lisa can look at that wound." We made our way back, Miguel carrying Kevin's body wrapped in a tarp. We couldn't just leave him there. He deserved better than that. The infected doctor we left where he fell, after making absolutely certain he wouldn't rise again. In the control room, Lisa's face went white when she saw Tanya's injury. We all knew what would happen, had seen enough news reports to understand the progression. Infection, fever, death, reanimation. It was only a matter of time. Tanya knew it too. "I don't want to become one of them," she said quietly. "Please don't let that happen." We set up a makeshift quarantine area in a small office adjacent to the control room. We made Tanya as comfortable as possible, gave her pain medication from the first aid kit, and took turns sitting with her. Her fever rose rapidly over the next few hours. By evening, she was delirious, talking to people who weren't there. Around midnight, Lisa took me aside. "We need to discuss what happens next," she said. "When she dies, she'll turn. We can't have that happen in here." It was the hardest conversation I've ever had. None of us wanted to say the words, to acknowledge what needed to be done. In the end, Miguel volunteered to handle it. I don't know exactly what happened after Tanya took her last breath. Miguel was alone with her. When he came out of the room an hour later, his eyes were red, but his face was set in grim determination. "It's done," was all he said. That night, we buried Kevin and Tanya outside the facility, in a small patch of grass near the water reservoirs. We said a few words, promised to remember them, and tried to process the reality that two people we had worked with for years were gone. Just like that. Back in the control room, Miguel showed me a deep cut on his arm he'd received during the confrontation with the infected doctor. It wasn't a bite, just a cut from falling against a metal shelf, but in these conditions, any wound could become dangerous. Lisa cleaned and bandaged it as best she could, using antibiotic ointment from the first aid kit. "We should watch for signs of infection," she said. "The regular kind, I mean. The regular kind of infection." As if that distinction needed to be made now. By morning, Miguel's wound was red and swollen. He had a slight fever. Not the rapid, devastating fever of the bite victims, but concerning nonetheless. We had limited medical supplies and no antibiotics beyond the topical ointment. "I need to find a pharmacy," Lisa announced. "There's one about 2 miles from here at the Westridge Shopping Center. They'll have what we need." I tried to talk her out of it. The risk was too great. But Miguel's condition was deteriorating, and Lisa was determined. She had been a combat medic before working at the water treatment plant. She knew what she was doing. "I'll be quick," she promised. "In and out before they even know I'm there." We helped her prepare. She took a facility maintenance truck, loaded a few empty containers for supplies, and armed herself with the fire axe. We opened the gate just wide enough for the truck to pass through, then immediately closed it behind her. Through the security cameras, I watched her drive away, the infected at the fence stirring at the sound of the engine, a few of them following sluggishly in the direction of the truck. I noticed something odd in their behavior. They completely ignored the cases of bottled water visible in the truck bed, focusing entirely on Lisa herself. It confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. They weren't after resources or territory. They wanted only one thing: us. With Lisa gone, Miguel and I monitored the water systems and kept watch over the facility. His condition wasn't improving, but it wasn't drastically worsening either. The cut was definitely infected, causing him pain and fever, but nothing like the rapid deterioration we'd seen with bite victims. "Tell me about your daughter," Miguel said as we sat watching the security feeds. I think he was trying to distract himself from the pain. "Sam," I said, taking out my wallet and showing him her picture. "She's 17, smart as a whip, planning to study environmental engineering next year." I swallowed hard. "She lives with her mother in Seattle. I was supposed to fly out next month for her birthday." Miguel nodded. "You'll see her again. This will pass. The government will get control of the situation." I wasn't as confident, but I appreciated his optimism. "What about you? Any family?" "My parents are in Arizona. My sister and her kids live in the suburbs about 20 miles north of here." He gestured to his injured arm. "I was planning to head their way once this healed." The radio crackled occasionally with fragments of emergency broadcasts. The information was becoming less helpful and more desperate. The safety zones were overflowing. Military personnel were being overwhelmed. The infection was spreading faster than containment efforts could manage. An hour passed with no word from Lisa. Then 2. I kept checking the cameras, hoping to see the maintenance truck returning. Miguel's fever was getting worse. He was shivering despite the warmth of the control room. I found some fever reducers in the first aid kit, but they seemed to have minimal effect. "If she doesn't come back," Miguel said through chattering teeth, "you should go. Take the backup generator keys and head east. The military is stronger there." I didn't want to have this conversation. "She'll be back. Just rest." 3 hours after Lisa left, we finally heard the sound of an engine approaching. I rushed to the security monitors. The maintenance truck was speeding toward the gate, a swarm of infected chasing behind it. There had to be at least 50 of them, moving with that terrible single-minded purpose. I ran to the gate controls and hit the button to open it, just enough for the truck to get through. Lisa gunned the engine, the truck fishtailing slightly as it passed through the narrow opening. I immediately closed the gate behind her, watching as the infected reached it seconds later, pressing against the chain link, their dead eyes fixed on the facility. When Lisa stumbled into the control room, I knew something was wrong. She was pale, sweating, her movements jerky. She dropped a bag of medical supplies on the table. "Got antibiotics," she said, her voice strained. "And painkillers. And this." She pulled out a small oxygen tank and mask. "Miguel's lungs might be affected if the infection spreads." "What happened out there?" I asked. She sank into a chair. "The pharmacy was overrun. I had to go to the hospital. It was a nightmare, Zeke. They're everywhere." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a bandage on her forearm, blood seeping through. "I was careful. So careful. But one of them cornered me in the pharmacy storeroom." My heart sank. "Lisa, no. It's just a scratch," she insisted. "Not a bite. I fell trying to get away, cut myself on a broken shelf." I wanted to believe her. I desperately wanted it to be true. But I'd seen her face when she came in, recognized the same look Tanya had had. Lisa seemed to read my thoughts. "I know what you're thinking, but it's not the same." "It's not." I helped her administer antibiotics to Miguel. His relief was immediate when the medication entered his system. Then Lisa cleaned her own wound, applied ointment, and a fresh bandage. The three of us sat in uneasy silence, monitoring the security feeds, watching the infected gather at our gate. By evening, Lisa's condition had deteriorated significantly. The fever came on hard and fast, exactly as we'd seen with Tanya. She finally admitted what we already knew. "It was a bite," she said, tears in her eyes. "I didn't want to scare you. I thought maybe I'd be different somehow." Miguel, feeling stronger after the antibiotics, moved to sit beside her. "We're here with you. You won't be alone." Lisa looked at me, her eyes clear despite the fever. "I need to ask something of you, Zeke. Something terrible." I knew what she wanted, the same thing Tanya had asked. I nodded slowly. "Not yet," she said, "but when it's time. Promise me." "I promise," I whispered. We made her comfortable in the same quarantine room we had used for Tanya. Miguel sat with her through the first few hours while I monitored the facility. The generator was running smoothly, but fuel levels were dropping faster than I had anticipated. At the current rate, we had perhaps 3 more days before we'd need to switch to manual operations. When I relieved Miguel to sit with Lisa, her condition had worsened dramatically. Her skin was burning hot, her breathing labored. She drifted in and out of consciousness. During a lucid moment, she gripped my hand. "The hospital," she gasped. "Something wrong there. Heard doctors talking. Said it wasn't supposed to spread so fast. Said it was engineered." I didn't understand. "What do you mean, engineered?" "By who?" "Don't know. But it started at Mercy General. Patient Zero was part of something, not just a construction worker." Her eyes closed and she slipped away again into delirium. Around midnight, Lisa's breathing changed, becoming shallow and rapid. Miguel and I sat with her, helpless to do anything but provide comfort in her final moments. When she took her last breath, Miguel squeezed my shoulder. "I'll take care of it," he said quietly. "You've done enough." I waited outside while Miguel did what needed to be done. It was quick, quiet, and as dignified as possible under the circumstances. When it was over, we wrapped her body carefully and added her to the small cemetery beside Kevin and Tanya. 3 colleagues gone in less than 2 days. The reality of our situation was becoming unbearable. Back in the control room, Miguel and I sat in silence, staring at the security monitors. The crowd of infected outside our fence had grown to nearly 100. They pressed against the chain link, occasionally testing its strength. It wouldn't hold forever. "We should leave," Miguel said finally. "The antibiotics are working. I'm feeling stronger. We should take what supplies we can carry and try to reach one of the evacuation centers." I shook my head. "Look at them out there. We'd never make it past the gate. Then, we find another way out. There must be maintenance tunnels, access points that aren't on the main blueprints. He was right. There were maintenance tunnels that connected to the city's water distribution system. I had the maps in my office. They could potentially provide a route out, away from the infected gathered at our gates. Even if we get out, I said, where would we go? The military zones are overwhelmed. The city is overrun, and I need to find a way to contact my daughter. Miguel looked at me with determination. My sister's place. It's in a gated community with its own water supply. If anyone's managed to secure an area, it would be them. They've been preppers for years. Always thought they were paranoid. Guess they were right. It was a plan, at least. Better than sitting and waiting for our fence to fall or our supplies to run out. We spent the next few hours planning, gathering what we would need, studying the tunnel maps. We would leave at dawn when the infected seemed least active. Just before sunrise, as we were making final preparations, the perimeter alarm sounded. Someone was at the gate. Through the security camera, we saw a car pulled up outside, a family desperately trying to get our attention. A man, a woman, and a young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old. They weren't infected, their movements were too coordinated, too purposeful, and they were looking directly into the camera, waving, pleading. We can't just leave them out there, Miguel said. I hesitated. Our supplies were limited. The facility's security was already compromised. Every additional person increased the risk, but they were alive, survivors, like us. And that little boy's face, terrified but hopeful, made the decision for me. I'll open the vehicle gate, I said, just enough for them to drive through. Be ready in case anything goes wrong. I activated the gate mechanism, opening it just wide enough for their sedan to squeeze through. The infected immediately noticed the movement, turning toward the opening with terrible synchronicity. The man behind the wheel gunned the engine, the car shooting through the narrow gap as the infected surged forward. I closed the gate immediately, watching as several infected slammed into it, arms reaching through the chain link. Miguel and I met the family at the main entrance, keeping a safe distance until we could verify none of them were bitten. The man introduced himself as Robert Chen, his wife as Anna, and their son as Danny. They had been trying to reach the military evacuation point but found the routes blocked by infected and looters. "We saw your lights," Robert said. "Figured there must be people here. Safe people." "How long have you been out there?" Miguel asked. 3 days, Anna replied, her arm protectively around Danny's shoulders. "Our neighborhood was one of the first hit. We've been driving, hiding, trying to find somewhere safe. Are you hurt? Any bites or scratches?" I had to ask, though they showed no signs of fever or infection. Robert shook his head. "No bites. We've been careful." I studied them carefully. They looked exhausted but uninjured. The boy was in shock, his eyes wide and vacant, but physically unharmed. After what we'd been through with Tanya and Lisa, I wasn't taking any chances. "I need to see," I said firmly. "All of you. Roll up sleeves, pant legs. Show me you're not infected." They complied without argument, understanding the precaution. No bites, no suspicious scratches. They were clean. "Come inside," I said finally. "We have food, water, shelter. But you should know, we were planning to leave. The fence won't hold much longer, and our generator fuel is running low." Robert looked around the facility. "This place looks more secure than anything we've seen in days. Why would you leave?" Miguel and I exchanged glances. I decided honesty was the best approach. "We've lost 3 colleagues in 2 days. The last one came back from a supply run infected. There are maintenance tunnels that connect to the city's water system. We were going to use them to bypass the infected at the fence. Anna's eyes widened. Underground tunnels? Wouldn't there be infected down there too? It's possible, I admitted, but less likely. The tunnels are secure, access points limited. Most people don't even know they exist. Robert pulled his wife and son closer. We just found safety. Please, we need to rest, just for a day. Danny hasn't slept properly in 3 days. I looked at the boy who was swaying slightly on his feet, dark circles under his eyes. I couldn't turn them away, not when they'd just found refuge. One day, I agreed. We'll rest, regroup, and decide in the morning. I showed them to the break room where they could clean up and rest. Miguel and I returned to the control room to monitor the situation outside. The infected were still gathered at the gate, more arriving every hour. Our decision to leave was looking more necessary by the minute. "What do you think?" Miguel asked quietly, nodding toward where the family was settling in. "About the Chens? They seem genuine enough. No signs of infection. But they're exhausted, especially the kid. We need to let them recover before we try the tunnels." Miguel nodded. "The boy reminds me of my nephew. Same age." He paused. "I should check our medical supplies, see what we can spare for them to take when we go." As Miguel went to inventory our supplies, I continued monitoring the water systems. Despite everything, we had maintained operations. The treatment processes were still functioning, the water still flowing to any homes that had pressure. It felt important somehow, this small victory against the chaos. Later, Robert joined me in the control room while his wife and son slept. He watched the monitors, taking in the growing horde outside. "They're drawn to life," he said quietly. "To movement, sound, even body heat. We learned to stay still, stay quiet when they were near." "How bad is it out there, really?" I asked. Robert's expression darkened. "Worse than you can imagine. The military tried setting up safe zones, but they were overwhelmed. We saw a helicopter gunning down civilians who were trying to climb the fences. They couldn't tell who was infected and who wasn't, so they just opened fire on everyone." He leaned closer to the monitor, studying the infected. "The strangest thing I saw was at a convenience store. A group of them ignoring bottled water completely, walking right past it to get to the clerk hiding in the back. It's like they don't need resources at all. Just us?" I nodded, remembering how the infected had ignored the water in Lisa's truck. They're not trying to survive, they're just trying to spread. As night fell, we took turns keeping watch. The facility felt different with the family there, less like a fortress and more like a refuge. For the first time since the outbreak began, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe we could make it to Miguel's sister's place. Maybe there were other pockets of survivors organizing, rebuilding. Maybe I would find a way to reach Sam after all. I didn't know then how quickly that hope would be shattered. I woke to the sound of the generator sputtering. For a moment, I thought we were under attack, but a quick check of the monitors showed the perimeter was secure, at least for now. The generator was simply running low on fuel. I had been monitoring its consumption, but the addition of 3 more people had increased our usage faster than anticipated. In the dim emergency lighting, I made my way to the generator room. I manually switched to our secondary unit and began refueling the primary. It was a temporary solution at best. Between the 2 generators, we had perhaps 2 days of power left, 3 if we were extremely conservative. The facility had been designed with power outages in mind. Many systems could be operated manually, but it would require constant attention and physical labor. Not impossible, but definitely not sustainable for long periods. As I finished with the generators, I noticed the sky beginning to lighten. Dawn of our 3rd day in this new reality. It felt impossible that only 72 hours had passed since that first news report. When I returned to the control room, I found Robert already there, studying the facility blueprints I had left on the table. "Morning," he said. "Hope you don't mind. I was curious about these tunnel systems you mentioned." "They're maintenance tunnels," I explained, pointing to the schematics, "built to allow access to the water distribution network without digging up streets. Some are large enough to walk through comfortably. Others are more confined." Robert traced a route with his finger. "They all connect to the city system." "Most do. This one here leads directly to the main city water junction about 2 miles east. From there, you can access most of the urban grid." He nodded thoughtfully. "Clever. Most people wouldn't think to use water infrastructure as an evacuation route." "Most people don't spend their careers thinking about water systems," I said with a small smile. The door opened, and Miguel entered with Anna and Danny trailing behind him. The boy looked slightly better after a night's rest, though still withdrawn. Anna had her arm around his shoulders protectively. "The generator woke us," Miguel explained. "Everything okay?" "For now," I said. "But we're burning through fuel faster than expected. 2 days, maybe 3, before we're running on manual operations only." Anna looked alarmed. "What happens then?" "We can still operate the essential systems manually. It's labor-intensive, but possible. The bigger concern is security. Without power, the electronic locks and surveillance systems won't function." "So we'd be blind and vulnerable," Robert concluded. I nodded. "Which is why we were planning to leave." Miguel moved to the window, looking out at the growing light. "The tunnels are still our best option. We can gather supplies today, rest, and leave tomorrow at first light when those things seem least active." No one argued with this plan. The danger outside our fence was visible to everyone. The infected had continued to gather overnight, drawn by our presence, our heat, our movement. They now numbered well over 100, pressing constantly against the chain link. We divided tasks for the day. Miguel and Robert would inventory and pack supplies for our journey. Hannah would help me with facility operations and monitoring the infected. Danny was given the simple task of sorting water purification tablets, more to keep him occupied than out of necessity. As the morning progressed, I showed Anna the basics of water treatment. She was a quick study, asking intelligent questions about chlorination levels and filtration processes. "I was a high school chemistry teacher," she explained. "Before." She glanced at Danny, who was methodically counting tablets at a nearby table. "Now I'm just trying to keep my son alive." "You're doing an amazing job," I told her. "He's lucky to have you both." She smiled sadly. "He saw things no child should see. When our neighborhood was overrun, our next-door neighbor, Mr. Wilson, he was like a grandfather to Danny. We saw him get torn apart right in front of our house." I winced. "I'm sorry." "Robert keeps saying Danny's in shock, that he'll process it eventually. But I'm worried about who he'll be when he comes out the other side of this." She looked at me curiously. "You said you have a daughter?" "Sam," I confirmed, taking out my wallet and showing her the photo I'd shown Miguel. 17. Lives with her mother in Seattle. Anna studied the picture. "She has your eyes. Have you been able to contact her?" I shook my head. "All networks are down. I keep trying different radio frequencies, hoping to get news from that region, but nothing so far." "You'll find her," Anna said with surprising certainty. "Fathers and daughters have a special bond. She's looking for you, too, I'm sure of it." Around midday, Miguel and Robert returned from their supply run through the facility. They had gathered an impressive amount of portable food, medical supplies, and tools. Miguel had also found several flashlights and spare batteries, essential for navigating the tunnels. "The maintenance tunnel entrance is here," I explained, pointing to the blueprint. "It's about a quarter mile of crawling before it opens up into a larger service tunnel. From there, we can reach the main water junction, which should be large enough to stand upright and move quickly. What about access points? Robert asked. Places where the infected might get in. Most access points are secured with heavy metal covers that require special tools to open. The infected might be strong, but they lack the coordination for that kind of task. Our biggest concern will be other survivors who might have had the same idea. As we finalized our plans, the radio in the corner suddenly crackled to life. A voice cut through the static, the first clear transmission we'd heard in nearly a day. "This is Captain Howard, U.S. Army, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. Military Safe Zone Echo 7 is operational and accepting uninfected civilians. Located at Jefferson County Fairgrounds, 20 miles east of the city center. Approach with caution, hands visible. All arrivals will be screened for infection. Repeat, Safe Zone Echo 7 is operational." We gathered around the radio, hope rising for the first time in days. "The fairgrounds," Miguel said. "That's less than 5 miles from my sister's community. We could make it there." "If the tunnels lead in that direction," Robert pointed out. I checked the schematics again. They do, or close enough. We'd need to emerge about 3 miles from the fairgrounds, but that's better than trying to navigate the entire distance above ground. The radio continued to broadcast the message on a loop. It was automated, not a live transmission, but it was the first concrete evidence that organized resistance to the outbreak was still functioning. Robert pulled his wife and son close. "We have a destination now. A real safe zone." I wanted to believe it. I desperately wanted it to be true. But something felt off about the timing, the convenience of it all. "We should still be careful," I cautioned. "Military safe zones were being overrun just yesterday, according to what you told me. Why would this one suddenly be secure?" "Maybe they regrouped," Miguel suggested. "Consolidated their forces." "Maybe," I conceded. "Either way, it's a better plan than just heading east with no specific destination. We'll stick with the tunnel route and aim for Echo 7. As evening approached, we made final preparations for our departure the next morning. I showed everyone how to use the water purification tablets and distributed small vials of concentrated chlorine dioxide precursors I had prepared. "This will purify water in an emergency," I explained. "Just add 5 drops to a liter of water, wait 30 minutes, and it's safe to drink. It's not pleasant tasting, but it won't make you sick." "You really know your chemicals," Anna observed. I nodded. "Water treatment is basically applied chemistry on a massive scale. These are the same principles, just portable." The mood that evening was cautiously optimistic. We had a plan, a destination, and the means to get there. Even Danny seemed more engaged, asking questions about the tunnels and listening intently to the answers. After dinner, while the others were preparing for sleep, I took a final walk through the facility. This had been my workplace for 7 years. I knew every pipe, every valve, every control panel. Walking away from it felt wrong somehow, like abandoning a post. But staying meant certain death when the fence eventually failed or our supplies ran out. In the chemical storage room, I gathered a few additional items I thought might be useful. Calcium hypochlorite granules in a sealed container. A small bottle of iodine solution. These were water purification chemicals, but in different concentrations they could serve other purposes. I had seen enough of the infected to know that conventional weapons might not always be effective. Sometimes you needed chemistry on your side. As I was securing these items in my pack, I heard a noise from the direction of the break room. It was faint, just the sound of a drawer closing, but at this hour, everyone should have been settling down to sleep. I moved quietly down the corridor, flashlight off to avoid alerting whoever was moving around. The break room door was ajar, a faint light spilling into the hallway. I peered through the gap and saw Robert going through the cabinets placing items in a bag. I pushed the door open. "Everything okay, Robert?" He startled, turning quickly. "Zeke, just gathering a few extra supplies for tomorrow." I noticed the bag was already quite full. "Looks like you've got enough there." "Can't be too careful," he said, zipping the bag closed. "Danny needs special food. He has allergies." It was a reasonable explanation, but something in his manner made me uneasy. He was too tense, too defensive. "We should all stick to the supply plan we agreed on," I said carefully. "Equal distribution, priority to essentials." "Of course," Robert said, smiling now. "Just being a dad, you know? Always preparing for the worst." I nodded, not pushing the issue. "Get some rest. Big day tomorrow." As I turned to leave, I noticed a small bottle of iodine solution on the counter, identical to the one I had just taken from the chemical storage. It hadn't been there earlier. Back in the control room, I found Miguel checking the security feeds one last time before turning in. "Everything quiet?" I asked. "As quiet as it gets with 100 infected trying to get through our fence," he replied grimly. "But they haven't made any progress. We should be fine until morning." I hesitated, then decided to share my concerns. "I just found Robert gathering extra supplies. More than his share." Miguel frowned. "You think he's planning something?" "I don't know, but he was asking very specific questions about the tunnel access points, and he had a bottle of iodine that could only have come from secured storage. You think they'd try to leave without us? Take our supplies?" I shook my head. "I don't know what to think. Maybe he's just scared, trying to protect his family. I would probably do the same in his position." "We'll keep an eye on them," Miguel decided. "But let's not create problems where they might not exist. We're all stressed, all trying to survive." I agreed, but as I settled down for what might be my last night in the facility, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The timing of the military broadcast, Robert's secretive gathering of supplies, the questions about access points. It felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite assemble. Outside, the infected continued their relentless pressure against our fence. Inside, I wondered if we might be facing a different kind of threat altogether. I woke to the sound of the generator sputtering. For a moment, I thought we were under attack, but a quick check of the monitors showed the perimeter was secure, at least for now. The generator was simply running low on fuel. I had been monitoring its consumption, but the addition of 3 more people had increased our usage faster than anticipated. In the dim emergency lighting, I made my way to the generator room. I manually switched to our secondary unit and began refueling the primary. It was a temporary solution at best. Between the 2 generators, we had perhaps 2 days of power left. 3 if we were extremely conservative. The facility had been designed with power outages in mind. Many systems could be operated manually, but it would require constant attention and physical labor. Not impossible, but definitely not sustainable for long periods. As I finished with the generators, I noticed the sky beginning to lighten. Dawn of our 3rd day in this new reality. It felt impossible that only 72 hours had passed since that first news report. When I returned to the control room, I found Robert already there, studying the facility blueprints I had left on the table. "Morning," he said. "Hope you don't mind. I was curious about these tunnel systems you mentioned." "They're maintenance tunnels," I explained, pointing to the schematics. "Built to allow access to the water distribution network without digging up streets. Some are large enough to walk through comfortably. Others are more confined." Robert traced a route with his finger. "They all connect to the city system?" "Most do. This one here leads directly to the main city water junction about 2 miles east. From there, you can access most of the urban grid. He nodded thoughtfully. Clever. Most people wouldn't think to use water infrastructure as an evacuation route. Most people don't spend their careers thinking about water systems, I said with a small smile. The door opened and Miguel entered with Anna and Danny trailing behind him. The boy looked slightly better after a night's rest, though still withdrawn. Anna had her arm around his shoulders protectively. The generator woke us, Miguel explained. Everything okay? For now, I said. But we're burning through fuel faster than expected. 2 days, maybe 3, before we're running on manual operations only. Anna looked alarmed. What happens then? We can still operate the essential systems manually. It's labor-intensive, but possible. The bigger concern is security. Without power, the electronic locks and surveillance systems won't function. So we'd be blind and vulnerable, Robert concluded. I nodded, which is why we were planning to leave. Miguel moved to the window, looking out at the growing light. The tunnels are still our best option. We can gather supplies today, rest, and leave tomorrow at first light when those things seem least active. No one argued with this plan. The danger outside our fence was visible to everyone. The infected had continued to gather overnight, drawn by our presence, our heat, our movement. They now numbered well over 100, pressing constantly against the chain link. We divided tasks for the day. Miguel and Robert would inventory and pack supplies for our journey. Anna would help me with facility operations and monitoring the infected. Danny was given the simple task of sorting water purification tablets, more to keep him occupied than out of necessity. As the morning progressed, I showed Anna the basics of water treatment. She was a quick study, asking intelligent questions about chlorination levels and filtration processes. I was a high school chemistry teacher, she explained. Before, she glanced at Danny, who was methodically counting tablets at a nearby table. Now I'm just trying to keep my son alive. You're doing an amazing job, I told her. He's lucky to have you both. She smiled sadly. He saw things no child should see. When our neighborhood was overrun, our next-door neighbor, Mr. Wilson, he was like a grandfather to Danny. We saw him get torn apart right in front of our house. I winced. I'm sorry. Robert keeps saying Danny's in shock, that he'll process it eventually. But I'm worried about who he'll be when he comes out the other side of this. She looked at me curiously. You said you have a daughter? Sam, I confirmed, taking out my wallet and showing her the photo I'd shown Miguel. 17, lives with her mother in Seattle. Anna studied the picture. She has your eyes. Have you been able to contact her? I shook my head. All networks are down. I keep trying different radio frequencies, hoping to get news from that region, but nothing so far. You'll find her, Anna said with surprising certainty. Fathers and daughters have a special bond. She's looking for you, too, I'm sure of it. Around midday, Miguel and Robert returned from their supply run through the facility. They had gathered an impressive amount of portable food, medical supplies, and tools. Miguel had also found several flashlights and spare batteries, essential for navigating the tunnels. The maintenance tunnel entrance is here, I explained, pointing to the blueprint. It's about a quarter-mile of crawling before it opens up into a larger service tunnel. From there, we can reach the main water junction, which should be large enough to stand upright and move quickly. What about access points? Robert asked. Places where the infected might get in? Most access points are secured with heavy metal covers that require special tools to open. The infected might be strong, but they lack the coordination for that kind of task. Our biggest concern will be other survivors who might have had the same idea. As we finalized our plans, the radio in the corner suddenly crackled to life. A voice cut through the static, the first clear transmission we'd heard in nearly a day. This is Captain Howard, U.S. Army. broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. Military Safe Zone Echo 7 is operational and accepting uninfected civilians. Located at Jefferson County Fairgrounds, 20 miles east of the city center. Approach with caution, hands visible. All arrivals will be screened for infection. Repeat. Safe Zone Echo 7 is operational. We gathered around the radio, hope rising for the first time in days. The fairgrounds, Miguel said. That's less than 5 miles from my sister's community. We could make it there. If the tunnels lead in that direction, Robert pointed out. I checked the schematics again. They do, or close enough. We'd need to emerge about 3 miles from the fairgrounds, but that's better than trying to navigate the entire distance above ground. The radio continued to broadcast the message on a loop. It was automated, not a live transmission, but it was the first concrete evidence that organized resistance to the outbreak was still functioning. Robert pulled his wife and son close. We have a destination now. A real safe zone. I wanted to believe it. I desperately wanted it to be true. But something felt off about the timing, the convenience of it all. We should still be careful, I cautioned. Military safe zones were being overrun just yesterday, according to what you told me. Why would this one suddenly be secure? Maybe they regrouped, Miguel suggested. Consolidated their forces. Maybe, I conceded. Either way, it's a better plan than just heading east with no specific destination. We'll stick with the tunnel route and aim for Echo 7. As evening approached, we made final preparations for our departure the next morning. I showed everyone how to use the water purification tablets and distributed small vials of concentrated chlorine dioxide precursors I had prepared. This will purify water in an emergency, I explained. Just add 5 drops to a liter of water, wait 30 minutes, and it's safe to drink. It's not pleasant tasting, but it won't make you sick. You really know your chemicals, Anna observed. I nodded. Water treatment is basically applied chemistry on a massive scale. These are the same principles, just portable. The mood that evening was cautiously optimistic. We had a plan, a destination, and the means to get there. Even Danny seemed more engaged, asking questions about the tunnels and listening intently to the answers. After dinner, while the others were preparing for sleep, I took a final walk through the facility. This had been my workplace for 7 years. I knew every pipe, every valve, every control panel. Walking away from it felt wrong somehow, like abandoning a post. But staying meant certain death when the fence eventually failed or our supplies ran out. In the chemical storage room, I gathered a few additional items I thought might be useful. Calcium hypochlorite granules in a sealed container. A small bottle of iodine solution. These were water purification chemicals, but in different concentrations they could serve other purposes. I had seen enough of the infected to know that conventional weapons might not always be effective. Sometimes you needed chemistry on your side. As I was securing these items in my pack, I heard a noise from the direction of the break room. It was faint, just the sound of a drawer closing, but at this hour, everyone should have been settling down to sleep. I moved quietly down the corridor, flashlight off to avoid alerting whoever was moving around. The break room door was ajar, a faint light spilling into the hallway. I peered through the gap and saw Robert going through the cabinets, placing items in a bag. I pushed the door open. "Everything okay, Robert?" He startled, turning quickly. "Zeke, just gathering a few extra supplies for tomorrow." I noticed the bag was already quite full. "Looks like you've got enough there." "Can't be too careful," he said, zipping the bag closed. "Danny needs special food. He has allergies." It was a reasonable explanation, but something in his manner made me uneasy. He was too tense, too defensive. We should all stick to the supply plan we agreed on, I said carefully. Equal distribution, priority to essentials. Of course, Robert said, smiling now. Just being a dad, you know? Always preparing for the worst. I nodded, not pushing the issue. Get some rest. Big day tomorrow. As I turned to leave, I noticed a small bottle of iodine solution on the counter, identical to the one I had just taken from the chemical storage. It hadn't been there earlier. Back in the control room, I found Miguel checking the security feeds one last time before turning in. Everything quiet? I asked. As quiet as it gets with 100 infected trying to get through our fence, he replied grimly. But they haven't made any progress. We should be fine until morning. I hesitated, then decided to share my concerns. I just found Robert gathering extra supplies. More than his share. Miguel frowned. You think he's planning something? I don't know. But he was asking very specific questions about the tunnel access points. And he had a bottle of iodine that could only have come from secured storage. You think they'd try to leave without us? Take our supplies? I shook my head. I don't know what to think. Maybe he's just scared, trying to protect his family. I would probably do the same in his position. We'll keep an eye on them, Miguel decided. But let's not create problems where they might not exist. We're all stressed, all trying to survive. I agreed, but as I settled down for what might be my last night in the facility, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The timing of the military broadcast, Robert's secretive gathering of supplies, the questions about access points. It felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite assemble. Outside, the infected continued their relentless pressure against our fence. Inside, I wondered if we might be facing a different kind of threat altogether. I don't know what woke me. Some instinct, maybe, honed by days of constant vigilance. The control room was dark, lit only by the glow of the monitors. The clock on the wall showed it was just past 3 in the morning. Everyone should have been asleep. A noise caught my attention, a metallic clink from the direction of the chemical storage room. I rose quietly, grabbing my flashlight but keeping it off. The emergency lights in the corridor provided just enough illumination to navigate. As I approached the storage room, I heard whispered voices. I recognized them immediately. Robert and Anna. They were supposed to be in the break room with Danny, resting for our departure in a few hours. We have to hurry, Robert was saying. Once we get what we need, we can secure the exits behind us. They'll never get out. Anna's voice was tense. What if they wake up before we're gone? Then we do what we have to do. This place is a fortress. With their supplies and these chemicals, we could last for months. Danny needs stability, not more running. I stood frozen in shock. They were planning to steal our supplies, trap us inside, and take over the facility for themselves. But Zeke has been so kind to us, Anna protested. And what about Miguel? He's still recovering. We look out for our family first, Robert said firmly. That's all that matters now. I backed away silently, my mind racing. I needed to warn Miguel, needed to stop them before they could execute their plan. I made my way quickly but quietly toward the break room where Miguel was sleeping. I never made it. As I passed a side corridor, Robert stepped out in front of me, a heavy wrench in his hand. Couldn't sleep, Zeke? He asked, his voice deceptively casual. Just checking the perimeter, I replied, trying to sound normal. The infected seem more active at night. Robert nodded, moving slightly to block my path. Anna and I were just discussing tomorrow's route. We're concerned about Danny. He's not strong enough for those tunnels. We'll take it slow, I assured him. Safety in numbers, right? That's the thing, Robert said, stepping closer. I'm not sure there is safety in numbers anymore. Not with limited supplies. not with the infected everywhere. I realized then that he knew I'd overheard them. There was no point in pretending. "You don't have to do this, Robert," I said quietly. "We can work together. There's room for all of us." "No." He raised the wrench. "There isn't." I reacted instinctively, diving to the side as the wrench came down where my head had been. It hit the wall with a dull thud. Robert recovered quickly, swinging again. This time I wasn't fast enough. The wrench caught me on the shoulder, sending pain shooting down my arm. I stumbled backward, trying to create distance. "Think about what you're doing. This is insane." Robert advanced on me, his face transformed by a cold determination I hadn't seen before. "What's insane is thinking the old rules still apply. It's survival now. Nothing else matters." He swung again. I ducked under the blow and tackled him, driving my shoulder into his midsection. We crashed into a supply shelf, sending tools and equipment clattering to the floor. The noise would surely wake Miguel, but I wasn't sure he could reach us in time. Robert was stronger than I expected. He brought the wrench down on my back, not a direct hit, but enough to knock the wind from me. I rolled away, scrambling for anything I could use as a weapon. My hand closed around a length of pipe. "Stop this," I gasped. "We don't have to fight." "Yes, we do," Robert said, advancing again. "Because you won't just leave. You'll try to take Danny with you." That made no sense. Why would I take their child? Unless... The realization hit me like a physical blow. "He's not your son, is he?" Robert froze for just a second, but it was enough confirmation. "He is now. We're all he has left." Before Robert could attack again, Anna appeared at the end of the corridor. "Robert, stop." She had Danny with her, the boy's eyes wide with fear. "This isn't what we planned." Robert hesitated, glancing at Anna and the boy. That moment of distraction was all I needed. I lunged forward with the pipe, striking his arm. The wrench clattered to the floor. I kicked it away and backed up, keeping the pipe between us. "What did you do to Danny's real parents?" I demanded. Anna pulled the boy closer. "We didn't do anything. They were already gone when we found him." "Hiding in a drainage pipe," Robert added, rubbing his injured arm. "Alone, starving. We saved him." "Then why lie about being his parents?" "Because nobody cares about someone else's kid in this world," Robert shouted. "We needed to look like a family to survive." The commotion had finally awakened Miguel. He appeared behind Anna and Danny, looking confused and alarmed. "What's happening?" "They were planning to steal our supplies and lock us in," I explained, keeping my eyes on Robert. "They're not a family. They found Danny after his parents died." Miguel's expression hardened. He moved cautiously around Anna, positioning himself between her and the exit. "Is this true?" Anna looked defeated. "Yes, but not how it sounds. We did find Danny alone. His parents had turned. He was hiding in a storm drain, hadn't eaten in days. We couldn't just leave him." "So, you decided to use him as a prop?" Miguel's voice was cold. "A ticket into safe zones?" "We protected him," Robert protested. "When the military turned us away because I had a fever, we could have abandoned him." "We didn't." I lowered the pipe slightly, trying to defuse the situation. "Let's all calm down. No one has to get hurt here." Robert laughed bitterly. "Easy for you to say. You have a fortress with water and power. We have nothing." "We invited you in," I reminded him. "Shared our supplies, our plan." "A plan that might get us all killed," Robert shot back. "These tunnels, this military safe zone, it's all a fantasy. The only real safety is right here." "Then why were you asking so many questions about the tunnels?" Miguel demanded. Robert and Anna exchanged glances. "We were going to secure them," Anna admitted. "Block the entrances after you left." Make sure no one else could get in the same way. And trap us outside, I added. You would have found another way, Robert said defensively. You're resourceful. But Danny needs stability. He needs walls and clean water and safety. He needs this place. I looked at the boy who was watching the confrontation with that same vacant stare. He hadn't spoken a word since they arrived. Shock, Robert had called it. But maybe it was something else. Maybe it was fear of the people who claimed to be protecting him. Danny, I said gently, are you okay? Has anyone hurt you? The boy's eyes flicked to mine, then to Robert and Anna. He didn't answer. Robert stepped forward. Don't talk to him. He's been through enough. If you really care about him, Miguel said, you'd want what's best for him. This facility won't be safe forever. The fence is weakening. The generators are running out of fuel. We need to leave while we still can. Anna seemed to be wavering. Maybe they're right, Robert. Maybe staying here alone isn't the answer. Robert shook his head vehemently. No, I'm not running anymore. I'm not losing another home. That's when I noticed something I should have seen earlier. The sheen of sweat on Robert's forehead, the slight tremor in his hands, the flush creeping up his neck. You're sick, I said quietly. That's why the military turned you away. You're infected. Robert's hand went to his arm where his sleeve covered his forearm. It's just a cut. I told you that. Show me, I demanded. Robert, Anna said, her voice breaking. Show them. Slowly, reluctantly, Robert rolled up his sleeve. The wound was unmistakable. A human bite mark, the flesh around it inflamed and discolored. It had been hastily bandaged, but the infection was spreading visibly beneath his skin. When? I asked. 2 days ago, Anna answered when Robert remained silent. Before we found your facility. A woman at a gas station. She seemed normal until she attacked him. Miguel and I backed away instinctively. We had seen how quickly the infection progressed. 2 days was already longer than most lasted. You knew, I said to Anna. You knew, and you still came here. You put us all at risk. He's fighting it, she insisted. He's stronger than most. The fever comes and goes. He's still himself. Robert leaned against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted. I thought if we could just find somewhere safe, I could beat it. I've been taking antibiotics. Anything we could find. Nothing works. Danny had moved slightly away from Anna, watching Robert with wide, frightened eyes. Whatever bond they had formed was fracturing, as the boy recognized the signs he had likely seen before. We need to quarantine him, Miguel said firmly. Now! Before he turns. I won't turn, Robert insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Anna moved to his side, supporting him. We'll go. Just give us some supplies and we'll leave. Find somewhere else. I shook my head. You know that's not an option. He could turn at any moment. Then what? Anna demanded, tears streaking her face. What do you expect me to do? Abandon him? I had no answer for her. The impossible choices of this new world were becoming clearer by the day. The ones we love become the greatest threats. Kindness becomes a liability. Trust becomes a gamble with your life as the stakes. A sudden crash from outside interrupted the standoff. We all turned toward the sound. Through the window, I could see that a section of the perimeter fence had given way. The infected were pouring through the breach, dozens of them stumbling across the open yard toward the main building. They're inside the perimeter, Miguel said unnecessarily. We need to lock down now. But Robert saw an opportunity in the chaos. With a surge of desperate strength, he shoved me aside and grabbed Anna's arm. Come on. While they're distracted, Anna hesitated, looking at Danny, who had backed away from both of them. Leave him, Robert urged. He'll slow us down. That was the moment Anna made her choice. She yanked her arm free from Robert's grasp and moved to Danny's side. Number I won't abandon him again. Robert's face twisted with rage, and something else, the infection progressing, changing him. Then you die with them. He turned and ran down the corridor toward the rear exit. Miguel moved to follow, but I stopped him. Let him go. We don't have time. We need to secure the building. The infected were already pounding on the main doors. We had minutes, maybe less, before they found a way in. Anna knelt before Danny, her hands on his shoulders. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry for everything, but I promise I'll protect you now. For real this time." The boy's vacant expression didn't change, but he allowed her to take his hand. It was the closest thing to acceptance he seemed capable of offering. "We need to go," I said. "The tunnels are our only option now." "But Robert knows about them," Miguel pointed out. "He could be waiting for us." I considered this. He's sick, getting worse by the minute. He'll be focused on escape, not revenge. We'll be careful, but we can't stay here. We moved quickly, gathering only the most essential supplies. The infected had breached the main entrance now. We could hear them moving through the facility, drawn by our scent, our sounds, our heat. Robert had left the rear door open in his escape, allowing more infected to enter from that direction as well. We were surrounded, trapped in the central section of the building. The control room would hold them off for a while, but not indefinitely. Our only escape route was through the maintenance tunnels. As we made our final preparations, Danny spoke for the first time since his arrival. His voice was small but clear. "I saw people drinking from puddles," he said. "They got sick faster after that." We all froze, looking at him in surprise. "What do you mean, Danny?" I asked gently. "Before they found me," he continued, nodding toward Anna, "people were drinking rainwater from the street. They turned faster than the others." The implication hit me like a physical blow. If the infection could spread through water, not just bites, the entire crisis took on a new dimension. My expertise wasn't just useful for survival now, it was essential. Anna looked at me, understanding dawning in her eyes. "That's why you're so important. Water treatment isn't just about comfort. It's about preventing the spread." I nodded slowly. If he's right, contaminated water could be creating new vectors of infection that no one anticipated. The pounding on the control room door grew louder. We had no more time for discussion. "Stay close," I instructed, leading them toward the maintenance access panel that would take us into the tunnels. "Move quickly but quietly, and whatever happens, don't drink any standing water you find down there." As I opened the access panel, revealing the dark tunnel beyond, I couldn't help wondering what other crucial information about this outbreak remained undiscovered. And I wondered if Robert, in his final lucid moments, might have known more than he revealed. The maintenance tunnel was narrower than I remembered, barely wide enough for an adult to crawl through. I went first, flashlight clenched between my teeth, pack dragging behind me. Miguel followed, then Danny, with Anna taking the rear. The sounds of the infected breaking through the control room door faded as we moved deeper into the passage. The air was stale and damp, carrying the faint chemical smell of chlorine and the earthier scent of mildew. Water treatment facilities are never truly dry. There's always moisture, always the potential for leaks. In my years working at North Ridge, I'd been in these tunnels dozens of times for inspections and repairs, but never under these circumstances, never with lives depending on my knowledge of their layout. After about 100 yards of uncomfortable crawling, the tunnel widened into a junction chamber large enough to stand in. I helped the others up, watching as they stretched their cramped limbs. "We'll rest here for a minute," I said, keeping my voice low. "Then continue east through the main service tunnel. It runs parallel to Oakwood Avenue for about a mile before connecting to the city's primary water distribution hub." Anna was comforting Danny, who seemed shaken but alert. The vacant look in his eyes had been replaced with something more focused, more present. Perhaps the danger had snapped him out of his dissociative state, or maybe having someone actually care for him without ulterior motives was making a difference. Miguel was checking his pack, organizing supplies. "How long until we reach the fairgrounds from here?" he asked. "If we maintain a good pace through the tunnels, and if we don't encounter any obstacles, we could reach the exit point by midday. From there, it's about 3 miles overland to the fairgrounds." "What about Robert?" Anna asked quietly. "Do you think he's down here somewhere?" I considered the question. Possible, but unlikely. He would have headed for the surface as quickly as possible. These tunnels would feel like a trap to someone in his condition. Miguel nodded in agreement. He was showing advanced symptoms. The discoloration around the bite, the fever, the mood swings. He wouldn't risk being trapped underground. Anna looked relieved but also troubled. "I should have seen it earlier. The signs were there. I just didn't want to believe it." "Why did you stay with him?" I asked. "After you discovered he was infected?" She looked down at Danny, who was examining the tunnel walls with careful curiosity. "We found Danny together. Saved him together. I thought that meant something. And Robert, before the bite, he was a good man. A doctor, actually. He kept saying he could fight it, that his medical knowledge would help him develop resistance. I wanted to believe him." A doctor. That explained his survival for so long after being infected, and possibly why he had been so interested in our medical supplies. He had been self-medicating, trying to slow the progression of the infection. "We should keep moving," Miguel suggested. "The longer we stay in one place, the riskier it gets." He was right. I checked my compass and the tunnel map I'd brought from the facility. "This way," I said, pointing to the eastern passage. "Stay close and watch your step. There are drainage channels that can be slippery." The main service tunnel was much larger than the access shaft we'd used to enter the system. We could walk upright, though Miguel, who was taller than the rest of us, had to duck occasionally beneath pipes and valve assemblies. Our flashlights created long shadows that danced along the curved walls. As we moved deeper into the tunnel network, I began to notice subtle changes in the environment. The water level in the drainage channels was higher than it should have been. The air carried a faint but unmistakable odor. Decay, the same scent that clung to the infected. "Something's wrong with the water flow," I murmured, kneeling beside a drainage channel. The water was cloudy, carrying suspended particles I couldn't identify without proper testing equipment. The treatment systems must have failed completely. "Is it dangerous?" Anna asked, pulling Danny back from the edge of the channel. "I wouldn't touch it," I advised. "And definitely don't drink it, no matter how thirsty you get. Use only the water we brought from the plant." Danny was watching the flowing water with a strange intensity. "It moves like they do," he said softly. "Slow, but never stopping." His observation was unnervingly accurate. The water did have an unnatural, relentless quality to its movement, as if contaminated not just physically, but somehow fundamentally changed in its behavior. We continued through the tunnels, following the main line eastward. The city's water distribution system was designed as a grid, with major service tunnels running parallel to the main roadways above. If we followed this tunnel to its terminus, we would reach Junction Hub 3, one of 5 main distribution points for the entire metropolitan area. Around mid-morning, according to my watch, we came upon the first real obstacle. A section of tunnel ahead had partially collapsed, leaving only a narrow passage through fallen concrete and twisted pipes. "What happened here?" Miguel asked, examining the damage. "Structural failure. Maybe from the chaos above," I speculated, "or sabotage. Either way, we need to get through. The alternative is backtracking a quarter mile to find another route." We approached the collapse cautiously, The passage was narrow but navigable, requiring us to squeeze through one at a time. I went first again, testing each step before committing my weight. "Be careful," I called back after safely reaching the other side. "The debris is unstable." Miguel sent Danny through next. The boy's small size made the passage easier for him, though Anna kept up a constant stream of encouragement from behind. Miguel followed, his broad shoulders barely fitting through the narrowest points. Anna was halfway through when we heard it, a low moaning sound, echoing from somewhere in the tunnel behind us, the unmistakable sound of the infected. "Hurry," Miguel urged, reaching back to help Anna through the remaining gap. "How could they have followed us?" she gasped as she emerged from the passage. The access panel was sealed. "There are multiple entry points throughout the system," I explained, already moving us away from the collapse. "Maintenance hatches, drainage outlets, emergency access ladders. If enough of them are searching, one might have found a way in." We increased our pace, moving as quickly as we dared through the dimly lit tunnel. The moaning behind us grew louder, then multiplied. Not one infected, but several. Maybe many. "There's a security door ahead," I said, remembering the layout. "It's designed to isolate sections of the system in case of contamination or flooding. If we can reach it and close it behind us, they won't be able to follow." The door was about a quarter-mile ahead, a heavy metal barrier with a manual wheel lock. As we approached, I saw with relief that it was intact. I spun the wheel, the mechanism stiff from lack of use, and pushed the door open just enough for us to slip through. Once everyone was on the other side, I pulled the door closed and spun the wheel to engage the locking bolts. The moaning was closer now, and we could hear the shuffling of multiple sets of feet dragging through the tunnel. "Will it hold?" Anna asked, holding Danny close. "It's solid steel, designed to withstand water pressure in case of a main break," I assured her. "They won't get through." We continued eastward, now in a section of the tunnel I was less familiar with. This portion of the system was newer, built during the city's expansion 5 years ago. The construction was more modern, the pipes and valves clearly labeled with reflective markers. After another hour of walking, we reached Junction Hub 3. It was a massive circular chamber 30 feet across, with tunnels radiating outward like spokes on a wheel. Hundreds of pipes of varying sizes converged here, carrying water to different sectors of the city. Under normal circumstances, the hub would be a hive of automated activity, with computers monitoring flow rates and chemical balances. Now it was silent, illuminated only by our flashlights and the faint emergency lighting that still functioned on backup power. "Which way?" Miguel asked, looking at the multiple tunnel openings around the chamber. I consulted my map. "The northeast tunnel will take us closest to the fairgrounds. There's an access ladder about a mile in that leads to a surface hatch near Ridgewood Park." As we crossed the chamber, something caught my attention. One of the main distribution pipes had ruptured, spilling water onto the floor of the hub. But what alarmed me was the condition of the water. It was discolored, almost brownish, with an oily sheen on its surface. "Don't touch that," I warned, redirecting our path to avoid the spill. "Water shouldn't look like that, even if all treatment has stopped." Danny pointed to something at the edge of the contaminated puddle. "Look." A dead rat lay partially submerged in the water. Its fur was falling out in patches, and its flesh had a grayish tint reminiscent of the infected. "That confirms it," I said quietly. "The infection isn't just transmitted through bites. It's in the water supply." "How is that possible?" Miguel asked. "I thought this was a virus or some kind of bacteria." "I don't know," I admitted. But Danny was right about what he saw. People drinking contaminated water were turning faster. "Whatever this is, it can survive in water, maybe even propagate through it." Anna pulled Danny further from the spill. "But we've been drinking bottled water. We should be safe, right? Bottled water, yes. And water from the treatment plant was still being properly processed when we left. But any open water sources, rainwater, standing water, even tap water in areas where treatment has failed, all potentially dangerous now. The implications were staggering. A waterborne vector would explain the rapid spread, the inability of quarantine measures to contain it. It wasn't just direct contact causing infection, but something as fundamental as drinking water. My job just got a lot more important, I said grimly. If we reach this safe zone, they need to know about this. Water purification has to be their top priority. We moved into the northeast tunnel, more cautious now of every drop of moisture around us. The tunnel sloped gradually upward, bringing us closer to the surface. According to my calculations, we were nearly at the access point that would take us above ground. As we approached the spot where the ladder should be, I felt a growing unease. Something was wrong. The tunnel showed signs of recent human activity. Fresh boot prints in the muddy floor, empty food wrappers, even a discarded bandage stained with blood. Someone's been here, Miguel observed, kneeling to examine the prints. Recently, multiple people, moving in both directions. Survivors using the tunnels for transportation? Anna suggested. Like us. Maybe, I said, unconvinced, but they've been coming and going, almost like patrols. We reached the access ladder, a metal rungs embedded in the wall leading up to a circular hatch. Before we could approach it, voices echoed down from above, people talking, just on the other side of the closed hatch. We froze, extinguishing our flashlights. The voices were muffled but clear enough to make out some of the conversation. Sector 5 is clear, someone reported. No sign of the infected or civilians. Good, another voice replied. Keep it that way. Command wants this area sanitized before nightfall. What about the water situation? A third voice asked. Still critical. The engineers say the contamination has spread to all major reservoirs. We're maintaining distribution control, but supplies are limited. And the civilians at the fairgrounds? A pause. What about them? How much longer are we keeping up the charade? Another pause. Until we've extracted everything useful, then they'll be processed like the others. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't the military setting up safe zones for survivors. This was something else entirely. We can't go up there, I whispered to the others. Back to the hub, we need to find another way out. We retreated silently, keeping our lights off and moving by touch along the wall. Whatever was happening at the fairgrounds, whatever processed meant, it wasn't safety. It was another trap. Back at Junction Hub 3, we gathered in a corner away from the contaminated water to reconsider our options. What was that? Anna asked, her voice shaking. Who were those people? Military, or what's left of it, Miguel guessed, but not the rescue operation they're broadcasting about. They were talking about the water, I added. They know it's contaminated. They're controlling distribution. Controlling it how? Anna pressed. And what did they mean by processing civilians? I shook my head. I don't know. But I think Danny was right about more than just infected water. There's something deliberate happening here. This isn't just an outbreak that spiraled out of control. Danny had been quiet through this exchange, but now he spoke up. The doctors at the hospital, they were doing tests before people got sick. My friend Jason's dad worked there. He said they brought in special patients. That aligned with what Lisa had told me before she died. Her fevered mention of engineering and Patient Zero being part of something. We need to find another way out, Miguel said decisively. And we need to avoid this military presence, whatever their agenda is. I checked the map again. There's another access point here to the southeast. It's farther from the fairgrounds, but might be safer. It comes up near the old industrial district." "Could Robert have overheard the broadcast, too?" Anna asked suddenly. "Could he have headed for the fairgrounds?" The question hung in the air uncomfortably. If Robert had reached the fairgrounds in his infected state, what had happened to him? And what might he have revealed about us, about the water treatment plant, in his final lucid moments? "We can't worry about that now," I said finally. "We need to focus on getting to the surface safely and finding real shelter." As we prepared to move toward the southeast tunnel, a new sound reached us, splashing footsteps coming from the tunnel we had just secured with the heavy door. Somehow the infected had found another way around. "Move," I urged, grabbing Danny's hand and pulling him toward our new escape route. Quickly but quietly. We entered the southeast tunnel at a steady jog, the splashing behind us growing louder. How many were there? Dozens by the sound of it. The infected were learning, or at least adapting. They were following us through the tunnels with an unsettling determination. "There's another security door ahead," I called out. "If we can reach it, we can seal this section too." But as we rounded a bend in the tunnel, our flashlights revealed a horrifying sight. The security door was already open, and standing in the doorway, swaying slightly with that terrible vacant stare, was Robert. Or what used to be Robert. His skin had the grayish pallor of the infected, his eyes clouded and lifeless. The bite on his arm had blackened, the infection having spread visibly through his veins. Behind him were at least a dozen more infected, all standing motionless until our lights fell upon them. Then, as one, they began to move toward us. "Back!" I shouted, pushing the others behind me. "Go back to the hub!" We turned and ran, the infected lurching into pursuit. Robert moved faster than the others, his transformation still recent enough that his coordination hadn't completely deteriorated. He led the pack, his mouth open in a silent snarl. Anna was crying as we fled, the reality of Robert's fate finally hitting her. "I should have put him down," she gasped between breaths. "I knew what would happen." We burst back into Junction Hub 3, only to hear splashing from the tunnel we'd originally come through. More infected were approaching from that direction as well. We were caught between two groups with limited options for escape. The North Tunnel, I decided quickly. It's not the direction we want, but it's our only choice right now. Miguel was already moving, pulling Danny along with him. Anna hesitated for just a moment, looking back toward the southeast tunnel where Robert's infected form would soon appear. "Anna, now!" I grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the North Passage. We made it into the tunnel just as the first infected from both groups entered the hub chamber. They seemed momentarily confused by the multiple options, giving us precious seconds to gain distance. The North Tunnel was in worse condition than the others, with more standing water and signs of structural damage. It clearly hadn't been maintained as well as the main routes. We splashed through puddles, no longer able to avoid contact with the potentially contaminated water. Our priority now was speed, not caution. After several minutes of running, we reached a maintenance alcove cut into the side of the tunnel. It was just deep enough to provide temporary concealment. "In here," I directed, ushering everyone into the space. "Quiet now. Let them pass." We pressed ourselves against the back wall of the alcove, extinguishing our lights. The infected had no such limitations on their vision. They hunted by sound and scent more than sight. Our only advantage was their lack of intelligence. If we remained perfectly still and silent, they might overlook the alcove entirely. The splashing grew louder as the first of them approached. In the dim, emergency lighting of the tunnel, I could make out their silhouettes passing by our hiding spot. 1, then 3, then at least a dozen more. Among them I recognized Robert's form, still leading the group with that terrible purposefulness. Danny was trembling against Miguel's side, his eyes wide with fear. Anna had her hand over her mouth to stifle her breathing. We all knew that the slightest sound would give us away. The parade of infected seemed endless. How many had gotten into the tunnel system? Had the entire city's infected population somehow found its way underground? Finally, the last of them passed by, continuing north in their relentless search. We waited several more minutes to be certain before risking movement or light. "That was too close," Miguel whispered. "We need a new plan. We can't keep running through these tunnels hoping to find a safe exit." He was right. Our original route was compromised, and now the infected were spread throughout the system. Any exit we might find could lead us straight into a horde. "What about the water treatment controls?" I suggested. "If we can reach the central flow management station, we might be able to redirect water flow, maybe even create a diversion." "Where would that be?" Anna asked. "There's a substation about half a mile back toward the hub on a side passage we passed. It controls water pressure and flow direction for this entire quadrant of the city." Miguel nodded slowly. A diversion could work. But what kind? "These tunnels have emergency flush protocols," I explained. "In case of severe contamination or blockage, the system can release a high-pressure surge through targeted sections. It's meant to clear debris, but it could also clear a path for us. Or wash us away with it," Anna pointed out. "Not if we're in a secured section when we trigger it. The substations are designed to withstand the pressure." It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all we had left. We waited until we were certain the infected were well away from our position, then carefully made our way back toward the hub, staying alert for any signs of stragglers. The side passage to the substation was right where I remembered it. A narrow corridor branching off from the main tunnel about a quarter-mile from the hub. The door was marked with faded yellow paint. "Flow Control Substation 7N." I tried the handle. Locked, as expected. "Stand back," I told the others, removing a small toolkit from my pack. Years of maintenance work had taught me more than just water chemistry. I had the door open in less than a minute. The substation was a small, cramped room filled with pipes, valves, and control panels. Emergency lighting provided a dim red glow, indicating the backup power was still functioning. I moved directly to the main control panel. "What's the plan exactly?" Miguel asked, securing the door behind us. "This substation controls flow regulators for sectors 7 through 12, I explained, examining the system. "If I can override the safety protocols, I can trigger a pressure surge in selected tunnels. Essentially, a flash flood that should clear out the infected." "Which tunnel do we flood?" Anna asked. I studied the system map on the wall. "We need to clear a path to the surface, preferably one that leads in the direction of the fairgrounds but avoids the military presence we heard." After analyzing our options, I pointed to a route on the map. "This tunnel here, Sector 9E, runs almost directly toward our destination. It's also a newer section with multiple emergency access ladders. If we flush it, then immediately follow the surge, we can reach this ladder here and exit to the surface." "How long before the infected return to the cleared tunnel?" Miguel asked. "Hard to say, but the flush should carry them a significant distance, and the noise might actually draw more of them away from other areas. It's our best chance." I began working on the control panel, bypassing security measures and accessing the emergency protocols. Water treatment systems are designed with multiple fail-safes to prevent accidental triggering of emergency procedures. Under normal circumstances, this operation would require authorization codes and confirmation from central control. But the emergency backup systems had a manual override option for situations exactly like this, when communication with central control was impossible. "How long will this take?" Anna asked nervously, keeping Danny close to her side. "Just a few more minutes," I assured her. The system is responding, but slowly due to the backup power. Danny had been examining the pipes running along the ceiling of the small room. "These carry the clean water?" he asked. "Not exactly," I explained, glad for the distraction as the system processed my commands. "These are control lines. They regulate pressure in the main distribution pipes. The drinking water runs through much larger pipes in the main tunnels." Danny nodded thoughtfully. "Like the ones that were broken, with the sick water." "Yes, exactly." The control panel finally displayed the emergency flush options. I selected the appropriate sector and began setting the parameters. "When I activate this, we'll have exactly 5 minutes before the surge is released," I explained. "We need to be in position at the junction leading to sector a safe distance from the affected tunnel. After the water passes, we'll have a narrow window to move through the cleared section before any infected can return." Everyone understood the plan. I finalized the settings and pressed the activation sequence. A warning alarm sounded within the substation, and red warning lights began to flash throughout the tunnel system. "That's going to attract every infected in range," Miguel observed grimly. "Can't be helped. Let's move." We exited the substation and moved quickly toward the junction that would keep us safely away from the flood path, while allowing us to access the cleared tunnel afterward. The alarm continued to sound, and in the distance, we could hear the moans of the infected responding to the noise. We reached the junction with 2 minutes to spare on my countdown. The passage ahead of us was the one I had selected for the flush. Already, we could hear infected approaching, drawn by the alarms. "When the water comes, stay back behind this barrier," I instructed, pointing to a raised concrete section designed specifically to redirect water flow. "The surge will be powerful enough to sweep away anything in its path." As if on cue, the first infected appeared at the far end of the tunnel, awkwardly stumbling toward us. More followed, a growing crowd of shambling figures moving with that terrible single-minded purpose. Among them, I spotted Robert again, still somehow at the front of the pack. "1 minute," I warned, checking my watch. The infected were closing the distance rapidly, now only 100 yards away and moving faster as they spotted us. 50 yards. 30. "Get ready," I said, positioning myself to move immediately after the surge passed. The infected were nearly upon us when a low rumbling began to vibrate through the floor of the tunnel. The sound grew rapidly to a roar as thousands of gallons of high-pressure water burst into the passage from behind the approaching horde. The wall of water hit the infected with tremendous force, sweeping them off their feet and carrying them forward like rag dolls. Robert's face, still recognizable despite his transformation, registered what almost looked like surprise before the water engulfed him. The surge rushed toward our position, picking up speed in the confined space. We pressed ourselves against the barrier, feeling the spray as the water level rose rapidly, channeled by the tunnel design to pass through the junction without backfilling our section. For nearly a minute, the torrent continued, a raging river carrying debris and bodies past our position. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the flow subsided to a manageable level, leaving only a fast-moving stream where a moment before had been a deadly flood. "Now," I urged, "before they can return." We moved quickly into the cleared tunnel, wading through ankle-deep water flowing swiftly in the direction we needed to go. The force of the surge had carried the infected far ahead of us, giving us a crucial head start. We moved as fast as we could through the tunnel, following the receding water. After about a quarter-mile, we reached the emergency access ladder I had identified on the map. It rose vertically through a narrow shaft to a surface hatch. "I'll go first," I said. "Check if it's clear above." I climbed the ladder quickly, reaching the heavy metal hatch at the top. It was designed to prevent backflow into the system, not to keep people in, so it opened relatively easily with a firm push. I emerged into dying daylight. The hatch opened into a small maintenance shed on the edge of what had once been a public park. Now it was a wasteland of abandoned vehicles and scattered debris. Most importantly, it appeared deserted, at least for the moment. I signaled the all clear, and one by one the others climbed out of the tunnel. Anna came last, helping Danny up the final rungs before pulling herself out with exhausted arms. "We made it," Miguel said, surveying our surroundings. "But where exactly are we?" I oriented myself using the setting sun and nearby landmarks. "About 2 miles southwest of the fairgrounds. We're closer than I expected." "Is that good or bad?" Anna asked. "After what we heard about the processing of civilians." "Good question." The military broadcast had lured survivors to the fairgrounds under the pretense of safety, but the conversation we'd overheard suggested something far more sinister was happening there. "We need more information before we approach," I decided. "We should find a secure location nearby, rest, and observe the situation from a distance." Miguel pointed to a cluster of buildings about half a mile east. "Those look like storage facilities. Concrete construction, limited access points, good defensible position." We agreed on the destination and set out across the park, moving carefully to avoid open spaces where we might be spotted. The sun was nearly set now, casting long shadows that provided some cover, but also created perfect hiding places for any threats. As we approached the storage facility, a new sound reached us, the steady thrum of helicopters in the distance, coming from the direction of the fairgrounds. "Military activity," Miguel observed, "increased from the sound of it." We reached the perimeter fence of the storage complex and found it intact but unguarded. A chain-link gate secured with a padlock blocked the main entrance. "I can handle this," Miguel said, examining the lock. He removed a small pry bar from his pack and worked it into the mechanism. After a few seconds of applied pressure, the lock gave way. We slipped inside and quickly located a suitable unit, a large storage bay with a roll-up door that was secured from the inside. Once we were all safely inside, Miguel and I pushed a heavy metal storage cabinet against the door as an additional barrier. The space was dusty but dry, filled with stacked furniture and boxes. Someone's life in storage, waiting for a future that would never come now. "We should rest here for the night," I suggested. "In the morning, we can scout the fairgrounds, see what we're really dealing with." No one argued. We were all exhausted from our ordeal in the tunnels, physically and emotionally drained. Anna found some blankets among the stored items and made a comfortable spot for Danny, who was already half asleep on his feet. As night fell completely, Miguel and I took inventory of our remaining supplies. The journey through the tunnels had soaked much of our food, but the sealed packages were still good. We had enough water purification tablets to last a week if we were careful. The first aid kit was intact, though we'd used some of the bandages treating minor injuries sustained during our escape. "What do you think is happening at the fairgrounds?" Miguel asked quietly as Anna settled down with Danny. "Nothing good," I replied. "From what we overheard, they're using the survivors for something, and they know about the water contamination. Could they be working on a cure? Testing people to find natural immunity? Maybe. But why the deception? Why lure people in under false pretenses if the goal is something beneficial?" Miguel had no answer for that. None of us did. The world had changed so fundamentally in just a few days that nothing could be taken at face value anymore. As the others drifted into uneasy sleep, I sat by the small window of the storage unit, watching the distant lights of helicopters circling the area around the fairgrounds. Whatever was happening there, we would need to approach with extreme caution. The infected were no longer our only threat, and possibly not even the most dangerous one. My thoughts turned to Sam, as they did in every quiet moment. Was Seattle experiencing the same chaos? Had the infection spread that far? Was she safe? Or was she facing her own version of this nightmare? The need to find her, to know she was alive, burned stronger than ever. But first, we needed to survive the immediate threats. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions. The fairgrounds might offer answers, but at what cost? And if the military was controlling water distribution, what did that mean for the broader spread of the infection? As I contemplated these questions, a distant explosion illuminated the night sky in the direction of the fairgrounds. A moment later, the sound reached us, a rolling boom that seemed to shake the very foundation of our shelter. Something was happening, something big, and we were heading straight toward it. The explosion woke everyone. Miguel was on his feet instantly, military training evident in his swift, controlled movements. Anna clutched Danny close, her eyes wide with fear. More explosions followed, smaller but equally concerning. "What's happening?" Anna whispered. "Not sure," I replied, peering through the small window toward the fairgrounds. "Looks like some kind of conflict. Muzzle flashes, movement of vehicles." Miguel joined me at the window. Military versus civilians? Or military versus infected? Or military versus military, I suggested. Could be a split in the ranks over whatever they're doing at the fairgrounds. We watched for nearly an hour as the distant battle continued. Occasionally, helicopters would sweep low over the area, searchlights cutting through the darkness. Eventually, the fighting subsided, leaving an uneasy quiet broken only by sporadic gunfire. "Change of plans," I decided. "We avoid the fairgrounds entirely. Whatever's happening there, it's not safe." "Where do we go instead?" Anna asked. "We're low on supplies, and Danny needs proper rest." I considered our options. "Miguel, you mentioned your sister's community. How far is it from here?" "About 15 miles north," he said. "Gated subdivision with its own water supply. Last time I spoke with her, they were organizing, setting up defenses." 15 miles is a long way on foot through potentially hostile territory, I noted. "There's a river that runs near here," Miguel said. "It leads almost directly to their community. If we could find a boat, we could travel most of the way by water." The idea had merit. Water travel would be faster than walking, and potentially safer if the infected were primarily concentrated in urban areas. The risk, of course, was exposure to potentially contaminated water, but we could take precautions. "There's a marina about 2 miles east of here," I recalled from my knowledge of the city's water systems. "Small boats? Nothing fancy, but it might have something we could use." We decided to wait until first light before attempting the journey. The immediate area seemed secure enough for a few more hours of rest. We took turns keeping watch, alert for any signs that either the military conflict or the infected were moving in our direction. My watch came just before dawn. In the growing light, I could see smoke rising from the fairgrounds area. Whatever had happened during the night had left significant damage. More concerning were the figures I could now make out moving across the park we had traversed yesterday. Infected, at least 24 of them, some still dripping with water, having followed us from the tunnels. I woke the others immediately. "We need to move. Now the infected from the tunnels have found their way to the surface." We packed quickly, distributing the weight of our supplies as evenly as possible. Danny seemed more alert this morning, his eyes clearer, his movements more purposeful. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a kind of wary resilience. Children adapt faster than adults sometimes, finding a new normal in even the most abnormal circumstances. Leaving the storage unit, we kept to the perimeter of the facility, using the buildings for cover as we worked our way east toward the marina. The infected were still concentrated in the park area, but some had begun to drift in our general direction, perhaps catching our scent on the morning breeze. The marina came into view after about 30 minutes of careful movement. It was a small facility, maybe 20 boat slips along a wooden dock extending into a river that fed into the larger bay to the south. Most of the slips were empty, their owners having fled or perished in the early days of the outbreak. A few boats remained, ranging from small fishing skiffs to medium-sized pleasure craft. "We need something with a motor," Miguel said as we approached cautiously. "Rowing upstream would be too slow and exhausting." The marina office was a small wooden structure at the entrance to the docks. The door hung open, a dark stain dried on the threshold. I didn't want to speculate about what had happened here. "Let me check for keys," I suggested. Many owners leave spares with the marina staff. Inside, the office was in disarray, drawers pulled open, papers scattered. But on a pegboard behind the desk, several sets of keys still hung, each labeled with a slip number and boat name. I grabbed all of them, not knowing which boats were still available. "Let's see what matches," I said, rejoining the others outside. We moved carefully onto the docks, checking each of the remaining boats against the keys I'd collected. Most were either damaged, out of fuel, or too large for us to handle with our limited experience. Finally, we found a match, a small motorboat named River Rat that appeared to be in working condition. "Check the fuel," I instructed Miguel as I examined the engine. It looked well maintained, a good sign. "About half a tank," Miguel reported, "enough to get us a good distance upstream if we're conservative." Anna helped Danny aboard while Miguel and I prepared to cast off. Just as we were about to untie the mooring lines, a voice called out from the shore, "Hold it right there!" We froze. Standing at the end of the dock were three figures in military-style gear, rifles raised and pointed in our direction. They weren't standard military uniforms, more like a patchwork of tactical equipment. Private security, perhaps, or military who had gone rogue. "Step away from the boat," the lead figure ordered. A woman, her face partially obscured by a tactical mask, but her voice clear and authoritative. Miguel tensed beside me, clearly calculating our odds in a confrontation. I placed a restraining hand on his arm. We were exposed on the dock, with Anna and Danny vulnerable in the boat. Fighting wasn't an option. "We're just trying to reach safety," I called back. "We're not infected, we're not looking for trouble." The woman approached slowly, her rifle never wavering. The two men flanked her, maintaining covering positions. "Everyone's looking for safety," she replied. "Doesn't mean they deserve it. Where are you coming from?" "The water treatment plant north of the city," I answered truthfully. "I was the supervising engineer there. We're trying to reach a community about 15 miles upstream." This seemed to interest her. "Water treatment, huh? You know about water purification?" I nodded. "It's my job. Or was, before all this." The woman lowered her rifle slightly, signaling her companions to do the same. "Show me your arms. All of you. Roll up your sleeves." We complied, understanding what she was checking for. No bites, no scratches, no signs of infection. After a careful inspection, she seemed satisfied. "I'm Major Reeves. Former Major, I suppose. These are Sergeants Cooper and Alvarez. We've broken from the main military operation." "Why?" Miguel asked cautiously. "Because what they're doing at the fairgrounds is wrong," she said simply. "They're not saving people. They're experimenting on them, trying to understand the infection by creating more infected under controlled conditions." This confirmed our worst fears about the processing we'd overheard. "You said you know water purification," Reeves continued, focusing on me. "That's valuable knowledge. The infection is waterborne. Most people don't know that yet." "We figured it out," I replied. "Saw the evidence in the tunnel system. Is that what the military is controlling? Water distribution?" Reeves nodded grimly. "They're using it as leverage. Clean water for cooperation. but they're not telling people the whole truth about what that cooperation entails. I introduced our group, myself, Miguel, Anna, and Danny. Brief explanations of our backgrounds, our journey, our destination. Miguel's sister's community, Reeves mused. Pine Haven Estates. Miguel nodded, surprised. You know it? We've had contact. They're organized, defensive. One of the few civilian outposts that's holding its own. They have their own well system, independent of the municipal supply. This was the first good news we'd heard in days. If Miguel's sister's community was still intact, still functioning, we might actually have a destination worth reaching. We were planning to take the river, I explained. It seems safer than traveling overland. Reeves considered this. The river is patrolled downstream, near the bay. Military boats checking for escapees from the fairgrounds. But upstream, you might make it. We have a camp about 5 miles north of here. We could escort you that far, then point you in the right direction. It was a tempting offer, but I was wary of trusting anyone affiliated with the military, even deserters. Why would you help us? I asked directly. Because we need allies, Reeves replied with equal directness, and someone with water treatment expertise would be valuable to our group. We're trying to establish an alternative to the military's approach, a sanctuary that actually deserves the name. I looked at Miguel, silently asking his opinion. He gave a slight nod. His military background probably gave him insight into whether Reeves was being truthful. All right, I agreed. We'll come to your camp, but we're still aiming for Pine Haven ultimately. Fair enough, Reeves said. We should move quickly. The explosion last night will draw infected from miles around. As if to emphasize her point, moans became audible from the direction of the storage facility. The infected were closing in, drawn by our voices or the earlier military conflict. We quickly finalized the plan. Reeves and Alvarez would escort us upriver in the boat, while Cooper took their vehicle and met us at a predetermined rendezvous point. With 5 adults and 1 child, the small boat would be crowded, but manageable for a short journey. I helped Miguel untie the moorings while Reeves and Alvarez boarded. Cooper departed immediately, heading for their vehicle parked nearby. The engine started on the first try, a small miracle given the circumstances. Miguel took the controls, having the most experience with boats. We pushed off just as the first infected appeared at the marina entrance, shambling toward the docks with that terrible, purposeful gait. The boat moved smoothly into the current, the engine humming steadily as we began our journey upstream. Behind us, the infected reached the docks, some falling into the water in their mindless pursuit. They didn't swim, but they didn't sink either, suspended in the water like grotesque buoys, still reaching, still hungry. As we left the marina behind, Reeves began to fill us in on what she knew about the broader situation. The military had fractured early in the crisis, with some units maintaining the original mission of civilian protection and others following new orders that prioritized research over rescue. They're calling it Protocol 17, she explained. Containment, research, eventual reconstruction. Sounds reasonable on paper, but in practice, it means sacrificing civilians to understand the infection. And the water? I asked. They know it's a vector? They knew from the beginning, Reeves confirmed grimly. Patient Zero wasn't a construction worker with a dog bite. He was a researcher exposed during a containment breach at Mercy General's biolab. They were studying a pathogen with unusual properties, something that could remain viable in water for extended periods. This aligned with the fragments I'd pieced together from Lisa's fever-addled confessions and Danny's observations. Are they working on a cure? Anna asked, holding Danny close as the boat navigated around a partially submerged tree. They say they are, Reeves replied, but their methods are suspect, and they're not sharing information with the remaining civilian authorities or even with all military units. My team and I were tasked with collection, bringing survivors to the fairgrounds. When we realized what was happening to them, we broke away. The river narrowed as we continued upstream, the banks closing in on either side. Dense vegetation provided good cover, but also limited visibility. We had to trust that Reeves knew the safe route. "There's a blockade about a mile ahead," she warned. "Military checkpoint controlling river access. We'll need to portage around it through the woods." "Won't they be looking for you?" Miguel asked, "since you deserted?" "They're looking for everyone," Reeves said simply. "But yes, we're a priority target. That's why Cooper took the land route. Divide their attention." I didn't like the sound of this. We were potentially walking into a conflict between military factions, with us caught in the middle. But turning back wasn't an option, not with the infected overrunning the areas we'd already passed through. As we approached the blockade, Reeves directed Miguel to steer toward a small inlet on the western bank, partially hidden by overhanging trees. The engine noise would carry on the water, potentially alerting the checkpoint, but we had little choice. "Cut the engine when I signal," Reeves instructed. "We'll paddle the last 100 yards silently." Miguel nodded, hand ready on the throttle. Alvarez distributed paddles from under the seats, and we prepared for a quick, quiet approach to the shore. The blockade came into view around a bend in the river. A floating barrier stretched across the water, manned by soldiers in full tactical gear. A small patrol boat moved back and forth on the far side. Reeves gave the signal, and Miguel cut the engine. We began paddling toward the inlet, moving as quietly as possible. The current worked against us, but with 5 people paddling, we made steady progress. We were nearly to the shore when a spotlight from the blockade swept in our direction. By some miracle, it passed just over our heads, not quite catching our boat in its beam. But it was clear they were alert, actively scanning for approaching vessels. "They're jumpy today," Reeves whispered. "The explosion last night must have put them on high alert." We reached the inlet and guided the boat into the concealing shadows. Alvarez quickly secured it to a tree, while Reeves organized our disembarkation. Danny went first, helped ashore by Anna, then the rest of us followed with our limited supplies. "We follow this game trail for about a mile," Reeves explained, pointing to a narrow path barely visible in the underbrush. "It circles around the checkpoint and rejoins the river upstream, where Cooper will meet us with the vehicle." "And if he doesn't make it?" I asked. "Then we continue on foot to the camp," she replied matter-of-factly. "We've all learned to be adaptable." We set off through the woods, moving as quietly as possible. The checkpoint was still within earshot, and any unusual noise might trigger an investigation. Danny, to his credit, seemed to understand the need for silence, following closely behind Anna without complaint. The game trail was rough going in places, overgrown and muddy, but it was still faster and safer than trying to forge our own path through the dense forest. After about 20 minutes of hiking, Reeves raised her hand, signaling us to stop. Voices were audible ahead of us. Male, authoritative, military. We had somehow intersected with a patrol. Reeves motioned us off the trail, into the denser undergrowth. We crouched low, barely breathing, as the voices grew louder. Through gaps in the foliage, I could make out 3 soldiers moving along a perpendicular trail, sweeping the area with methodical precision. "They're looking for deserters," Reeves whispered, her mouth close to my ear. "They know this area is a bypass route." The patrol passed within 20 feet of our position. If they had been looking more carefully, if they had thermal imaging equipment, if any one of us had made the slightest noise, we would have been discovered. But luck was with us, and they continued on, their voices gradually fading. We waited 5 full minutes before Reeves signaled it was safe to move again. As we returned to the trail, I noticed Danny staring intently at something on a nearby tree. Following his gaze, I saw a strange fungal growth spreading up the trunk with an unnatural bluish tint. "Don't touch that," I warned quietly, pulling him away. The fungus looked oddly similar to the discoloration I had seen in the contaminated water in the tunnels. Another vector of the infection? I made a mental note to ask Reeves about it when we were safely away from the checkpoint. We continued our difficult trek through the forest, each step taking us further from the blockade, but not necessarily closer to safety. The world had become a complex calculation of competing threats: the infected hostile military, contaminated water, and the ever-present specter of starvation or exposure. As we walked, I found myself thinking again about Sam. If what Reeves said was true, if the military had known about the waterborne infection from the beginning, what did that mean for more distant cities? Had they been warned? Had there been time to secure water supplies in places like Seattle before the infection spread nationwide? These questions haunted me as we pushed further into the woods, toward an uncertain rendezvous and an even more uncertain future. We had been hiking for nearly an hour when Reeves finally called a halt. The forest had grown denser, the trail narrower. My legs ached from the uneven terrain, and even Miguel, with his military training, was showing signs of fatigue. Danny was holding up remarkably well, though Anna occasionally carried him over the roughest stretches. "The rendezvous point is just ahead," Reeves announced, checking her watch. "Cooper should be waiting with the vehicle." "Assuming he made it through," Alvarez added quietly. Reeves shot him a look that silenced further commentary. "Let's keep moving. Stay alert." As we approached a small clearing, I could see the glint of metal through the trees. A vehicle, military style but unmarked, was parked at the edge of what appeared to be an old logging road. Cooper stood beside it, rifle at the ready. "Perimeter secure, Major," he reported as we emerged from the tree line. "But we should move quickly. Spotted a patrol about 2 miles west, heading this way." Reeves nodded and directed us toward the vehicle, a modified transport truck with an enclosed rear compartment. "Everyone in. Cooper, take point. Alvarez, cover our rear." The interior of the truck was sparse but functional. Bench seating along both sides, basic medical supplies, ammunition, and water containers secured against the walls. We settled in as the engine rumbled to life, Cooper pulling smoothly onto the logging road. "Your camp is secure?" Miguel asked, his military background evident in the precise way he phrased the question. "As secure as anything can be these days," Reeves replied. "Former ranger station, concrete construction, natural water source that we've tested and treated. Limited access points, good visibility. We've reinforced the perimeter with additional barriers." "How many people?" I asked. 23, including us. Mostly military who broke away from command, plus a few civilians with useful skills. Doctor, engineer, communication specialist." "Any children?" Anna asked, stroking Danny's hair as he dozed against her shoulder. Reeves shook her head. "You'll be our first. Most civilians with children went to the official evacuation centers before we understood what was happening there." The truck bounced along the rough road, heading deeper into the forested hills north of the city. Through the small rear window, I could see the urban sprawl receding behind us. Smoke rose from several locations, fires left to burn with no one to fight them. "What do you know about other cities?" I asked Reeves. "Has the infection spread nationwide?" "It's everywhere," she confirmed grimly. "Major population centers hit first, then spreading outward. Communication networks are failing, but last we heard, the entire eastern seaboard was compromised. West Coast was trying to establish quarantine zones, but with the waterborne vector, conventional containment methods are ineffective." My heart sank at this news. Sam was on the West Coast. If the infection had reached there, even quarantine zones might not protect her. Is there any safe water anywhere? I pressed. Any place the infection hasn't reached? Some isolated communities with independent water sources might be safe if they locked down early enough. Deep well systems, properly maintained, could be secure. But municipal systems are compromised across the board. This aligned with what Reeves had said about Miguel's sister's community. Their independent well might have saved them, assuming they had recognized the threat and prevented contamination. "What exactly is this infection?" Anna asked. "You said it started in a lab?" Reeves was quiet for a moment, seemingly weighing how much to share. "It's a modified pathogen, originally designed as a water purification agent, a biological system that would target specific contaminants. But something went wrong. It mutated, adapted to target organic matter more broadly." "Wait," I interrupted. "It was supposed to clean water. That's ironic." "The military has been experimenting with biological purification systems for years," Reeves explained. "Deployable solutions for contaminated water in conflict zones. This was supposed to be a breakthrough, self-replicating microorganisms that could purify large water bodies with minimal input. Instead, they created something that uses water as a carrier to infect living hosts." "And what happens to the infected?" Miguel asked. "I've seen the transformation, but not what comes after. Do they just keep going until they break down physically? Do they die of starvation eventually?" "They don't seem to need conventional sustenance," Reeves said. "The infection appears to modify cellular metabolism. They consume organic matter, us, but not for nutrition in the traditional sense. It's more like they're spreading the infection, incorporating new organic material into the collective." "Collective?" Anna asked, alarmed. "Poor choice of words, perhaps," Reeves backtracked, "but there does seem to be a hive aspect to their behavior. They respond to stimuli as individuals, but move and hunt in coordinated patterns that suggest some form of shared direction." The truck slowed as Cooper navigated a particularly rough section of road. Through the window, I could see we were climbing steadily into more rugged terrain. The forest was changing too, transitioning from deciduous to predominantly evergreen. "Almost there," Reeves announced. "About 2 more miles." As if on cue, the radio in the front crackled to life. A voice, faint but clear, came through with an urgent message. "Base camp to Recon 1. Major Reeves, do you copy? We have a situation." Reeves grabbed the handset. "This is Reeves. Go ahead." "Perimeter breach on the southeast quadrant. At least 30 infected overran the outer barrier. We've contained them at the secondary line, but we're taking casualties. Need immediate support." Reeves's expression hardened. "ETA 10 minutes. Hold position. Do not, repeat, do not abandon the inner perimeter." She replaced the handset and turned to us. "Change of plans. We're heading into a hot zone. When we arrive, stay in the vehicle until I give the all-clear. Cooper will remain with you for protection." Miguel leaned forward. "I can help. I have combat training." Reeves assessed him briefly. "Can you handle a rifle?" "Marine Corps 8 years," he replied simply. She nodded and opened a locked container beneath her seat, removing a military-grade rifle and ammunition. "Standard M4. Safeties engaged. 15-round mag, 1 in the chamber." Miguel checked the weapon with practiced efficiency, his movements automatic after years of training. Anna looked terrified. "What about us? What if something happens while you're gone?" "Cooper stays with the vehicle," Reeves repeated firmly. "If the situation deteriorates beyond recovery, he has orders to get you to safety, specifically to continue on to Pinehaven." The truck accelerated, bouncing violently as Cooper pushed the engine harder. We held on to whatever we could grab, the tension mounting with every passing minute. Finally, the trees opened up to reveal a large clearing dominated by a sturdy concrete building, the ranger station Reeves had mentioned. Surrounding it was a complex of hastily constructed barriers, fences, vehicles positioned as blockades, even trenches in some sections. On the southeast side, I could see the breach Reeves's team had reported. Infected were pressing against an inner barrier where several armed individuals were holding them back with coordinated gunfire. Cooper stopped the truck at what appeared to be a fortified entrance on the opposite side from the breach. Reeves and Alvarez exited immediately, weapons ready. Miguel followed after giving Anna a reassuring nod. "Stay low, stay quiet," Cooper instructed us from the driver's seat. "If something goes wrong, I'll get you out fast." Through the windows, we watched as Reeves, Alvarez, and Miguel ran toward the conflict, joining the defenders at the inner perimeter. The infected were more numerous than I had initially estimated, at least 40 pressing against the barrier, with more visible in the tree line beyond. "Where did they all come from?" Anna whispered, holding Danny close. The boy was fully awake now, watching the scene with wide, frightened eyes. "They move in herds," Cooper explained, keeping his rifle trained on the area around our vehicle. "Follow noise, movement, scent. One finds something interesting, others follow. Chain reaction." The gunfire intensified as Reeves's team engaged the infected. They were using coordinated fire, conserving ammunition by targeting only those infected that were actively breaching the barrier. It was a disciplined defense, but the sheer number of infected was concerning. Then I noticed something strange. Among the standard infected, with their shambling gaits and mindless aggression, there was one that moved differently. It stayed back from the barrier, observing, almost like it was analyzing the defense. When gunfire concentrated in one area, it directed other infected toward a different section. "Cooper," I said urgently, "look at that one, at the tree line, the one in the lab coat." Cooper adjusted his position to see where I was pointing. "What about it?" "It's not attacking. It's directing the others." He studied the figure for a moment, then swore under his breath. "You're right. It's a controller." "A what?" "That's what we call them. Infected that retain higher cognitive functions. They're rare, but we've encountered them before. They seem to emerge when the host had specific neurological conditions before infection, or was in certain professions requiring strategic thinking." "Like a doctor," I said, remembering Robert. "Or a researcher." Cooper nodded grimly. "They're the dangerous ones. They can adapt, plan, coordinate the standard infected like tools." He grabbed the radio. "Major, we have a controller at the southeast perimeter directing the attack. Lab coat, male, approximately 50 yards back from the main group." Reeves's voice came back immediately. "Confirmed. Prioritizing target." I watched as Reeves redirected 2 of her team to focus on the controller. They took careful aim, but the infected was smart enough to stay partially concealed behind trees. When they fired, it moved, using standard infected as shields. "It knows," I said, amazed and horrified. "It understands what they're trying to do." The assault on the barrier was intensifying. The infected were now concentrated at specific points, directed by the controller to maximize pressure on the weakest sections. One segment began to give way under the onslaught. "We may need to move," Cooper warned, starting the engine. "Be ready." Anna clutched Danny tighter. "What about Miguel?" "We can't leave him." "If that barrier falls, no one inside will survive," Cooper said bluntly. "My orders are to get you to safety." I made a quick decision. The controller is the key. If we eliminate it, the attack loses coordination. "And how do you propose we do that from here?" Cooper asked. I looked around the truck, my eyes falling on the supplies secured along the walls. Among them was a flare gun with several cartridges. "Can you get us closer to the southeast perimeter, within range of that flare gun?" Cooper followed my gaze. "That's a signaling device, not a weapon." "It fires a burning magnesium flare at high velocity," I countered. "And infected are vulnerable to fire. We don't need to kill it directly. Just create enough of a distraction for your team to target it effectively." Cooper hesitated, then nodded. "Hold on." He put the truck in gear and circled around the perimeter, keeping a safe distance from the breach but moving us closer to the section where the controller was operating. When we were within about 100 yards, he stopped. "Any closer, and we risk drawing their attention," he warned. I grabbed the flare gun and loaded a cartridge. It was designed for visibility, not accuracy, but at this range, I didn't need precision, just general direction. "Once I fire, they'll know we're here," I warned. "Be ready to move fast." Cooper nodded, keeping the engine running. Anna held Danny's head against her chest, shielding his eyes from what was about to happen. I took aim through the window, pointing the flare gun at the tree line where the controller was partially visible. The weapon was awkward, not designed for this purpose, but I didn't need a direct hit, just close enough to create chaos. I fired. The flare shot out in a bright arc, illuminating the area even in daylight. It struck a tree near the controller, igniting the dry bark instantly. The sudden fire caused the infected to react instinctively, turning toward the new threat. For a crucial moment, the controller was fully exposed, looking toward the source of the flare. That moment was all Reeves's team needed. 3 shots rang out in quick succession. The controller jerked with the impact, then collapsed. Almost immediately, the assault on the barrier lost cohesion. The infected continued to press forward, but without the strategic direction, their attack became disorganized and ineffective. Cooper was on the radio instantly. "Controller down. Repeat. Controller down." "Confirmed," came Reeves's reply. "Good work. Perimeter team moving to neutralize remaining infected. Maintain position." The defense team, now able to focus on smaller, manageable groups of infected, began systematically eliminating the threat. Miguel was visible among them, his military training evident in his precise movements and disciplined fire. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the last of the infected fell. Reeves signaled the all clear, and Cooper drove us to the main entrance of the compound. As we exited the vehicle, Miguel jogged over to meet us, his face streaked with sweat and grime, but otherwise unharmed. "That was your idea with the flare?" he asked, looking at me with new respect. I nodded. Seemed like the best option from our position. It worked. Broke their coordination completely. He turned to Danny and Anna. "You two okay?" Anna nodded, still holding Danny close. The boy seemed shaken but resilient. Something about witnessing an actual victory against the infected had changed his expression. For the first time since we'd met him, I saw a spark of hope in his eyes. Reeves approached, reloading her weapon as she walked. That was quick thinking with the flare. The controllers are our biggest problem these days. Standard infected we can handle, but the intelligent ones, they're a whole different threat. "Have you seen many of them?" I asked. "More lately," she admitted. "It's like the infection is evolving, creating specialized units. Most turn into standard infected, but some, usually those with specific skills or knowledge, become something worse." This information chilled me. If the infection could adapt to preserve and utilize the skills of its hosts, it wasn't just a mindless pathogen. It was something far more dangerous. "Come inside," Reeves directed. "We need to secure the perimeter, treat the wounded, and discuss next steps. Your water treatment expertise might be even more valuable than I initially thought." As we followed her into the ranger station, I noticed several of her team examining the body of the controller they had killed. Unlike standard infected, They were taking precautions: hazmat gloves, masks, containment bag. They were treating it like a biological specimen. "What are they doing?" I asked Reeves. "Research," she replied simply. "We need to understand what we're fighting. That means studying it, especially the variants." Inside the station, the contrast with the chaos outside was striking. The space was organized, clean, with clear areas designated for different functions: command center, medical, supplies, living quarters. About a dozen people moved purposefully through the rooms, some treating minor injuries sustained during the attack, others monitoring communications equipment. "Welcome to Outpost Sentinel," Reeves said. "Our temporary home in this new world. Let's get you situated, and then we have much to discuss." As we moved deeper into the compound, I couldn't shake the image of the controller, directing the other infected with apparent strategy and purpose. If the infection could create entities like that, preserve human intelligence while corrupting its intent, then the threat was far greater than I had imagined. It wasn't just surviving the infected we needed to worry about, but outthinking them as well. And with water as the primary vector, my expertise wasn't just useful, it was essential. The knowledge I'd taken for granted throughout my career had suddenly become one of the most valuable assets in this new, terrifying world. Outpost Sentinel was more organized than I had expected. The main building, the former ranger station, had been converted into an efficient command center with dedicated areas for different functions. The central room served as both meeting space and operations center, with maps covering the walls and a radio setup monitored around the clock. Smaller rooms had been repurposed for medical treatment, food preparation, and sleeping quarters. Reeves introduced us to the core team. Dr. Eliza Chen, a former CDC virologist who had been working with the field unit when the outbreak hit. Marcus Wright, a communications specialist who had maintained their radio network. James Harrison, a civil engineer who had helped fortify the outpost. And several others with military or specialized backgrounds, all of whom had broken away from the main military response when Protocol 17 was implemented. "Your arrival is fortunate, Doctor," Chen told me after hearing about my water treatment background. "We've been trying to establish reliable purification methods for local water sources, but with limited success." She led me to a small makeshift lab where various water samples were being tested. "The pathogen is unlike anything I've seen before. It's neither virus nor bacteria in the conventional sense, but has properties of both. It can remain dormant in water for extended periods, then activate when it contacts a suitable host." "Have you identified any purification methods that work?" I asked. "Heat is effective, boiling for at least 10 minutes. Certain chemical treatments show promise, but we're limited in our supplies." She looked at me expectantly. "I understand you brought some specialized knowledge from the treatment plant." I nodded, removing several small containers from my pack. Calcium hypochlorite granules, chlorine dioxide precursors, iodine solution, standard water treatment chemicals, but in concentrations designed for emergency use. Dr. Chen examined the containers with interest. "These could be invaluable. But we need more than just temporary solutions. We need a system for ongoing purification of larger water volumes." "The ranger station should have a well system," I noted. "Is it compromised?" "No. It tested clean," she explained, "but it's insufficient for our growing numbers, especially if we continue to take in survivors. And if we're going to expand operations, establish more outposts, we need portable purification methods." While I discussed water purification with Dr. Chen, Anna and Danny were being checked by the outpost's medic, and Miguel was debriefing with Reeves about the defense against the infected. By evening, we had been fully integrated into the outpost's routine. We were assigned sleeping spaces, given a share of the communal dinner, and included in the watch rotation. It felt strange to be part of an organized group again after days of desperate survival. After dinner, Reeves called a meeting in the main room. The entire outpost gathered, about 20 people, including our group. The atmosphere was serious but not despairing. These people had purpose, direction, a sense that they were fighting back rather than just surviving. For those who haven't been briefed, our new arrivals have provided valuable information that confirms several of our theories, Reeves began. First, the infection is definitely waterborne, capable of spreading through municipal systems. Second, the military's Protocol 17 involves experimentation on survivors rather than genuine evacuation. And third, the infected are evolving, with some developing higher functions that allow them to coordinate others. Murmurs spread through the group. This wasn't entirely new information to them, but hearing it confirmed seemed to solidify their resolve. Dr. Chen and Zeke Thorne, our water engineer, are working on improved purification methods. Miguel Cortez has marine combat experience that will strengthen our defense protocols. Anna and Danny represent our first civilian family unit, reminding us what we're fighting for. It was strange to be spoken of in such terms, reduced to our utility in this new reality. But it made sense. In a world where survival depended on skills and knowledge, we were assets as much as individuals. Tomorrow, we proceed with Operation Watershed, Reeves continued. The military's central water distribution point is 3 miles south of here. They're using it to control the civilian population, offering clean water in exchange for volunteers for their research. We're going to disrupt that operation and redirect some of their purification equipment to our satellite locations. This was the first I'd heard of such a plan. It sounded dangerous, potentially suicidal given the military's resources. I caught Miguel's eye across the room, seeing my concern mirrored in his expression. "I need volunteers for the strike team," Reeves announced. "High risk, essential mission." To my surprise, Miguel raised his hand immediately. Several others joined him, including Alvarez and Cooper. After the meeting broke up, I cornered Miguel. "What are you doing? We need to get to your sister's community, remember? Find safety for Anna and Danny. Try to contact our families." "That's still the plan," he assured me. "But Reeves says they can get us there more safely after this operation. They have vehicles, fuel, weapons we'll need, and the route will be clearer if they disrupt the military's hold on the area." "It's a huge risk," I argued. "You saw how organized the military is, how well equipped." "I also saw what they're doing to civilians," he countered. "You heard what Reeves said about the processing at the fairgrounds. If we can help stop that, even temporarily, isn't it worth the risk?" I couldn't argue with his logic, but something about the plan felt off. Why would Reeves commit so many resources to a raid when her outpost had just been attacked? And why was she so interested in our help, particularly mine? Later that night, unable to sleep, I found myself in the communications room where Marcus Wright was monitoring the radio frequencies. "Anything from the West Coast?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Seattle specifically?" He adjusted some dials before answering. "Sporadic reports. Seattle established a quarantine zone early, using the sound as a natural barrier. Last transmission we received indicated they were holding, but that was 3 days ago. Communications are increasingly unreliable." It wasn't much, but it gave me hope. If Seattle had established effective quarantine, Sam might be safe. It was something to cling to. "What about this operation tomorrow?" I asked. "Seems risky, attacking a military water distribution point." Marcus glanced around before leaning closer. "Between us? It's more than risky, it's desperate. But we're running out of options. The military is consolidating control over all purified water sources. Without access, independent groups like ours can't survive long term." And my water treatment knowledge? Is that why Reeves was so interested in finding us? Partly, he admitted, but there's more to it. The equipment at that distribution point isn't just for purification. They're using it to study the pathogen, possibly even control its concentration in the water supply. This revelation chilled me. You're saying they're deliberately controlling who gets infected. I'm saying they're managing the spread according to some protocol we don't fully understand. Clean water for collaborators, contaminated for everyone else. Dr. Chen believes they might even be testing different strains. I left the communications room with my mind racing. If the military was actively manipulating the infection, that would explain the coordinated response, the containment of information, the processing of civilians. It wasn't just reaction to a crisis, but management of a biological weapon. I found Anna still awake, sitting beside Danny's sleeping form in the small room we'd been assigned. "He finally fell asleep," she whispered. "First time he's looked peaceful since I found him." I sat beside her. "You've done well with him. He's lucky to have found you." She shook her head. "I lied to you all. Used him as a way to gain your trust. That's not something to be praised. You protected him when Robert would have abandoned him," I reminded her. "That counts for something." She was quiet for a moment. "What do you make of this place? These people? They're organized, committed, but there's something they're not telling us about tomorrow's operation. I think it's more dangerous than they're letting on." "Miguel volunteered," she noted. "He seems to trust them. Miguel is a Marine. He's programmed to run toward danger, not away from it." Anna looked down at Danny. "What should we do?" "Stay here while they conduct their raid. Continue to Pine Haven on our own." I considered our options. For now, we stay. See how tomorrow plays out. But be ready to move quickly if things go wrong. These people may have good intentions, but they're fighting a war they can't win. Morning came too soon. The outpost was buzzing with activity as the strike team prepared for the operation. Vehicles were being loaded, weapons checked, communications equipment tested. Miguel was in the thick of it, already fitting in with the military precision of Reeves's team. Reeves approached me as I watched the preparations. "I need your expertise on this mission, Thorne. You understand water treatment systems better than anyone here. You'll be able to identify the critical components we need to secure." I hadn't volunteered, hadn't agreed to participate, but I also recognized that refusing might raise suspicions about our group. "What exactly am I looking for?" I asked, reluctantly accepting that I was now part of this operation. The distribution point was converted from a regional water treatment facility, similar to your plant, but smaller. They've added military-grade purification systems and research equipment. We need to secure the portable purification units and any documentation about the pathogen. "And how do you plan to get past the military guards?" "Distraction and precision," she replied. "We create a diversion that draws most of their forces away, then a small team infiltrates the facility. You'll be with that team along with Miguel, Dr. Chen, and myself." The plan sounded reasonable enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being used, that there was another agenda beneath the stated objectives. As the teams made final preparations, I sought out Anna and Danny. "Stay close to the communications center," I instructed them. "If anything goes wrong, if the outpost comes under attack while we're gone, find Marcus Wright. He seems trustworthy, and he knows about Pine Haven." Anna nodded, understanding the subtext. If the mission failed, if we didn't return, she should find a way to reach Miguel's sister's community without us. The operation began at midday. 2 vehicles left the outpost, a transport truck carrying the main strike team, and a smaller, faster vehicle for our infiltration team. Reeves drove, with Miguel beside her, Dr. Chen and myself in the rear seats. As we approached the water distribution facility, I got my first clear view of what we were up against. The site was heavily fortified with multiple checkpoints, armed guards, and a perimeter fence topped with razor wire. Military vehicles were parked at strategic points, and a large water tanker was being filled at a loading dock. "That's our primary target," Reeves said, nodding toward a smaller building adjacent to the main facility. "Research lab and portable purification storage. According to our intelligence, security is lighter there than at the main distribution center." We parked a safe distance away, using trees for cover, and waited for the diversion to begin. Reeves checked her watch repeatedly, tension evident in her posture. 5 minutes, she announced. "When the action starts, we move fast, in and out in 15 minutes, no exceptions." The explosion, when it came, was larger than I had expected. A massive fireball erupted on the far side of the facility, followed by secondary explosions that suggested fuel or ammunition had been ignited. "That's our cue," Reeves said, putting the vehicle in gear. "Everyone ready?" Instead of driving toward the main gate, now a flurry of activity as guards rushed to respond to the explosion, she headed for a section of fence partially obscured by trees. A hidden entry point had been prepared in advance, the fence cut and loosely reattached to appear intact from a distance. We slipped through quickly, running in a crouch toward the target building. No alarms had been raised about our approach. All attention focused on the major disturbance across the compound. The door to the research building was locked, but not alarmed. Reeves made quick work of it with a specialized tool, and we were inside within seconds. The interior was clinical, sterile, with lab equipment and storage units lining the walls. "Chen, check the research materials," Reeves ordered. "Miguel, secure the exit. Thorne, with me to identify the purification equipment." We moved through the facility with practiced efficiency, despite this being our first operation together. Miguel secured doors and monitored external activity through windows. Dr. Chen downloaded data from computers and gathered research notes. Reeves and I located the portable purification units, compact military-grade systems capable of processing several thousand gallons per day. "These are perfect," I confirmed, examining one of the units. "Self-contained, chemical reservoir, solar charging capability. They could supply clean water for dozens of people indefinitely if properly maintained." "Tag them for extraction," Reeves instructed, moving to check another area of the storage room. As I marked the essential equipment, something caught my eye. A map on a nearby wall, showing water distribution routes throughout the region. Red markers indicated contamination points. Blue showed secure water sources. To my shock, one of the largest blue markers was labeled Pine Haven Estates Water Reserve. "Miguel," I called softly, "look at this." He joined me, studying the map with growing concern. "They know about my sister's community. They have it marked as a secure water source. Which means it's probably a target," I concluded. "If they're controlling water access to manage the population, an independent source would be a threat to that control." Our conversation was interrupted by "Doctor," Chen's urgent whisper from the lab area. "Reeves, you need to see this." We all gathered around a computer where Chen had accessed classified files. The screen displayed test results, infection rates, mortality statistics, all organized by water distribution sector. "They're not just studying the infection," Chen said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "They're managing it. Different concentrations, different strains released in selected areas. It's a controlled experiment using the civilian population as test subjects." Miguel looked horrified. "They're deliberately infecting people?" "Worse," Chen replied. "They're studying how different demographics respond to different strains. Age groups, genetic backgrounds, prior medical conditions. They're using the apocalypse as a massive clinical trial." Reeves was scanning through the data rapidly. "Download everything. We need this as evidence." I noticed something else in the files, a reference to Primary Containment Facility PCF-14, located in Seattle. The same text mentioned successful quarantine protocols and controlled testing environment. Seattle, where Sam was. My blood ran cold at the implications. "We need to move," Reeves announced, checking her watch. "Extraction team will be here in 3 minutes." We gathered the essential equipment and data, loading it onto rolling carts for quick transport to the extraction point. As we prepared to exit, Reeves pulled me aside. "What you saw about Seattle, I know that's where your daughter is. We'll discuss options once we're back at the outpost." I was surprised she had noticed my reaction, had made the connection so quickly. It reinforced my sense that there was more to Reeves than just a rogue military officer fighting for survival. The extraction went smoothly, almost too smoothly. The diversion had drawn most of the security forces away, and our small team was able to load the purification equipment and research materials into a waiting vehicle that appeared precisely on schedule. As we drove away from the facility, no alarms were raised, no pursuit initiated. It felt wrong, too easy for a heavily guarded military installation. "Something's not right," I murmured to Miguel as we watched the facility recede in the distance. "I know," he replied quietly. "Stay alert." We returned to Outpost Sentinel without incident, unloading our acquired materials to an enthusiastic welcome from the remaining team members. The main strike force returned shortly after, reporting successful destruction of the facility's fuel reserves and communications array. It was a victory, undeniably. But as I watched Reeves and her core team examining the research data we had recovered, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had been allowed to succeed, that our raid had served some purpose beyond our understanding. That night, as the outpost celebrated their successful operation, I met with Miguel, Anna, and Marcus Wright in the communications room, away from the main gathering. "We need to leave," I told them without preamble. "Tomorrow, as early as possible. The map showed Pine Haven is known to the military, possibly targeted for its independent water supply. And there's something happening in Seattle, something connected to the primary containment protocols." "I agree," Miguel said. "This operation was too easy, and Reeves's interest in us feels calculated, not coincidental." Wright nodded slowly. "I can help. There's a vehicle, supplies set aside for emergency evacuation. It could get you to Pine Haven." "Why would you help us leave?" Anna asked suspiciously. "Because not everyone here agrees with Reeves's methods," Wright replied. "Some of us joined to help civilians, not to wage war against the military. And what we found today, the evidence of deliberate infection, crosses a line that changes everything." We made plans quickly, decisively. Wright would prepare the vehicle under the guise of a perimeter check. We would leave before dawn, when the night watch was at its most fatigued and the celebration would have left many sleeping deeply. As we dispersed to prepare, I found myself standing outside, looking up at the stars visible through breaks in the forest canopy. 5 days since the first news report. 5 days that had transformed the world irrevocably. Water, the most basic necessity of life, had become both salvation and weapon. I thought about Sam, somewhere in Seattle, possibly in a controlled testing environment. I thought about Miguel's sister at Pine Haven, unknowingly targeted for her community's independent water supply. I thought about the infected we had encountered, particularly the controllers with their terrifying intelligence. This wasn't just an outbreak, wasn't just a collapse of civilization. It was something more calculated, more deliberate, and we were just beginning to understand the true scale of what we were facing. Dawn would bring a new phase of our journey, new challenges, new threats, but also, perhaps, answers to questions we were only beginning to formulate. And in this new world, where water ran red with infection and the dead walked with purpose, answers might be the most valuable resource of all.